Too many who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to dangle. Be it 1962 or last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll binge your ears with reckless self-abandon. The amazing spider talk. The amazing spider talk. Don't swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the amazing spider
Hello, I'm the mischievous Mark Giannacchio, and I own every issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, and they all count.
And I'm the available Alan Scherstl, and I think I still own a handful of print issues of Amazing Spider-Man still in the basements and attics of parents and in-laws across this great nation of ours. But Mark, what is ownership anyway, especially of a character like Spider-Man, who, despite what Disney copyright lawyers would argue, truly belongs to the collective imagination, to all of us. And that is a truth that I believe exposes the fallacy of your ongoing question of whether or not annuals count. All the issues count, Mark, if you believe they do. They don't count if you believe they don't. Since we all own Spider-Man, we all can choose.
Wow, everyone can enjoy that, Alan. Well, thank you, and thank you to you, the listeners, for joining us for this very special anniversary episode of The Amazing Spider Talk. It has been 10 years since Dapper Dan Gvozden and I first sat down, begrudgingly I might add, to record the first episode of the then superior Spider Talk.
Yes, Mark, but first on this very special episode, there is some bittersweet news we have to announce. As you may have noticed, listeners, the Spider Slack is hanging at half-mast this week. First, the bitter truth, the bitter news. Not an imaginary story, not a what if. Over the past few months, you've known that Dapper Dan Gvozden became Daddy Dan Gvozden. But this weekend, he unfortunately became deceased Dan Gvozden. It turns out that, sadly, Dan was unable to check the solicitations of his life to discover that he was going to be crushed to death by a truck carting unsold copies of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, Annual 2. I shouted "look out" a couple times, implying some sort of meaning, but it wasn't enough. It turns out in this one instance, reading the solicitations and speculating about lookouts would have actually been a worthwhile endeavor.
Oddly enough, that was the second annual issue released that year, and I warned Dan about that when I reminded him week after week that the annuals didn't count. However, it was on that day we all, and Dan especially, learned the ultimate lesson, that with great quantities of unsold annual issues must also come counting the great amount of weight that is crushing your co-host to death.
Rest in peace, Dan. In your honor, we've hurled your body into the nearest smokestack where I'm sure it will lay in a restful, ashy sleep. But this is comics. We did not see the body.
There was no corpse. There was no corpse. But now to the sweet. With Dan's departure, I've begged Alan to not only replace him, but to make the show better than it's ever been. And that means a new #1 of Amazing Spider Talk, a new Chrome logo, and so much more. It's Amazing Spider Talk, but without all the nerdy nitpicking, endless speculation, annoying sound effects and criticisms of my microphone not working, the retakes and the late nights. I'm on the East Coast, he's on the West Coast. Alan, when does it end? Anyway, it's a new era, Amazing Spider Talk.
That is right, Mark. And to mark this special, historic, totally radical milestone episode, we are joined by legendary comic book creator Rob Liefeld to kick off a new era of Amazing Spider Talk.
Hey, it's Rob. You guys, I just wanted to give a shout out to Spider-Man, the amazing Spider Talk, as it rallies from the unexpected tragedy, rises from the ashes like a phoenix. Come on, got to squish all the Marvel references I can in here. For Mark and Alan, I just wish you guys all the best as you continue Spider-Man, the amazing Spider Talk, going into its 10th year. Congratulations, you guys. We will all be tuning in. You can never get enough Spider Talk. You can never get enough Spider-Man. Wishing you all the best, Mark and Alan. Don't get caught up in the web. I'm so punny. Take care.
Wow. I mean, you heard what a legend this guy is, and I mean that just said it all. I mean, thanks, Rob, for the heartfelt and sincere well wishes for departed Dan and the future of Amazing Spider Talk. You know, Rob, as many of you all probably know, I mean, his history with Spider-Man is so rich. I mean, he did that one annual issue, the Atlantis Attacks one, with the Abomination and She-Hulk, and man, if that doesn't make you want to count annuals, I don't know what will.
The titular Amazing Spider Talk just got even more amazing with Rob's presence and our new number 1, which also simultaneously marks our return to legacy numbering at the same time somehow.
Mark, Alan, I've returned and I'm stronger than ever. I saw everything. I no longer need to read solicitations and speculate wildly about the future of Spider-Man. In death, it was all revealed to me. First, I saw my life flash before my eyes, and honestly, it was way too many images of me fighting with Spider-Man Twitter. But then, cosmic knowledge came to me, and it is only now that I can fully understand the final chapter of the Nick Spencer run on Amazing Spider-Man.
That's impossible. Now you need to prove these powers to us, Dan.
Mark, you don't understand. Just the words describing what actually happened in those comics alone are potent enough to liquefy your brain where you stand. But I saw it all, and with great power comes great responsibility.
Well, nobody wants to see that happen, Dan.
You know, guys, I think I've had about enough of this. Dan, when you asked me to help fake your own death, I thought it would be fun and exciting, like Spider-Man comics. But it turned out to be kind of unsettling and slapdash and a little soiling for all of us, like Spider-Man comics. So I think I'm going to start my own 5-part podcast now. Not with you, not with Mark, but with that guy who sent you all those creepy packages and stalker notes a few years back. And he and I are going to talk about the comics that really matter. And that, of course, is Peter Gallagher's brilliant, baffling daily Heathcliff strips. Would there be a Wreck Raft without the garbage ape from Heathcliff? Still, I'm glad to have you back, Dan. Happy anniversary. If you ever do get Liefeld on for real, can you guys please do this for me? Can you show him a panel of Mary Jane's hair from his run, and also show him a basket of sweet potato curly fries, and ask him to explain what the difference is? Garbage ape out!
Garbage Ape died on the way back to his home planet.
Who promoted Alan to co-host in my absence anyway? Well, good luck with your departure, Alan. I'm so thrilled to be back just in time to celebrate our oversized, monumental, groundbreaking 10th anniversary episode of Amazing Spider Talk. I even left out the word traumatizing, maybe because I'm moving past this whole solicits thing. But before we get to reminiscing about Mark and my friendship and the history of Spider Talk, we wanted to find the perfect topic for our 10th anniversary episode. So like most 10th anniversary comics, we thought, gimmicks? Let's talk about them.
Let's just start by saying, who knows gimmicks in comic books better than me? As some of our listeners may or may not know, and I think this might even predate the Amazing Spider Talk, Dan. For several years, I had a column at CBR called Gimmick or Good, where I looked at different gimmick covers of comics, not just Spider-Man, but all 90s comics, like, you know, the chromium, the foil, the lenticular, the poly bags with trading cards, X-Force #1. And I reviewed the contents of those comics to determine if the comic was really only popular because of the gimmick cover or because the comic itself was actually good. So we're going to kind of do a riff on that for our 10th anniversary, because as Dan and I discovered when we were kind of just having a moment of, what are we going to do for the 10th anniversary episode? I don't know. We were like, it's the aluminum anniversary. So aluminum, it's like chromium, it's like metallic. I mean, it's so 90s, right, Dan? I mean, we got to just do it, right? We're leaning into it, right?
The 10th anniversary of dating my wife is coming up, and I'm already thinking about what comic book I get her. I know
there you go.
Murder
Yes.
me.
Yeah,
she would murder me.
Yeah, very excited by that.
Very excited.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think this column was it was born like squarely in the Superior era of our show. That brief segment, but I love this column.
I think it predates you, Dan, because I used that to launch Chasing Amazing into like some visibility, and then you found me, of course, by talking about Stegron. But like I have to imagine, I have to imagine that's where you found me. But like either way, it's all smushed together in the same like general timeline. For sure.
Totally. Well, it was a great column, and I do want to add on to what you're saying in our discussion today, which is I don't think necessarily we're even talking about individual issues and their quality necessarily, although we're going to do that, but we're going to kind of talk about like major gimmicks, as we call them, that have existed throughout Spider-Man's history, and whether that gimmick itself has ended up kind of transcending gimmick and being like an actual good trope for the series as a whole. So we can talk about it kind of on two levels, because some of these gimmicks, I think, are things we think positively on, whether or not the comic is great, and others are things that, like, I think have become real parts of the mythos that plague us as comic readers. Like, what are some of the gimmicks that might fall, under this kind of umbrella as we're establishing it?
Yeah, I do think it's worth clarifying, Dan, because yes, when I did it for CBR, I was looking specifically at like gimmicky covers, like visual gimmicks, but we're talking, like you said, more like thematic gimmicks. So things like milestone and anniversary issues of Spider-Man, like our anniversary episode of Amazing Spider Talk, or major status quo traumatizing changing events, as the current editorial regime would refer to them as, or new number ones, all new, all exciting Spider-Man, we've seen that before. Or how about a new costume with new powers, or just the new costume? We've had many of those over the years, and we're going to talk about some of the more significant ones in that regard. And then, of course, like the huge, all-encompassing crossover issues that like bring in other characters and other comic book series. I mean, we just got through one with Dark Web, and Lord knows that's a classic. I mean, we'll be talking about that at our 20th anniversary, I'm sure. But yeah, we're going to be like talking about things like that. And we're going to talk about, like you said, Dan, like the gimmick itself, not necessarily like it's a bad comic book, but like these ideas, these thematic tropes, and how they've been deployed. We're going to kind of look at some of the more significant ones over the years, and kind of talk about the longevity of it, and how it's used in this context, and kind of how it's been used since then. So this is going to be fun. I love talking about stuff like this. So I hope our listeners enjoy it. And Dan, I hope you enjoy it. I hope I'm not going to bore you with this.
No, I'm really excited about it. I one more thing before we get into it is like, I really hope people approach this in good faith, because, we're going to call some of your favorite issues gimmicks. And that's not to say that it's a bad issue. Like gimmicks have their place. Not only in like the realm of like comic enjoyment. A lot of us first started reading these comics because of a gimmick. Like my first Amazing Spider-Man had a gold foil cover, and I bought it because it had a gold foil cover. And without that, maybe I wouldn't be here today. I'd probably have a full head of hair and, have many kids. Who knows how I would have reinvested my life. No, I'm kidding. But,
was it a gold foil and an anniversary, Dan?
It was a combo. See, look at that. Like the double gimmick. And And also to say, like, from like a sales point, like we look at gimmicks as like, I think gimmick is kind of defined as like almost like a cheap way of boosting sales. That has nothing to do with the like internal story, not necessarily. It is some hook that will get a person to pick up a comic. You know, in the 90s, it became a real sign, you know, of a way of like hyping something up so it could get on the, you know, the market at a higher sale price and boost, you know, speculation and all that stuff. But like, and I always come back to this. I think one of the most interesting conversations we've ever had on the show was with Tom Brennan talking about that Barack Obama cover, which was a huge gimmick and a very successful one at that. But it then led to them being able, it sold so well, they could have kept their staff on longer and maintained more, people in the Spider office. And gimmicks have their place in keeping people employed as well. Yeah. And I always think about that no matter what we're talking about. Not that it's my job to keep in mind other people's jobs, but these gimmicks exist for a corporate reason as well, which is fairly transparent, but doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing if the comic is also good, you know?
Absolutely. Well, Dan, do you want to just dive right into this and start dissecting some gimmicks, if you will?
Yeah, well, so how did we're going to go, let's start with the first one, but how did we determine these? Like, you and I chatted about it, and we kind of were like what are the things that reoccur throughout Spider-Man's history is kind of how we figured these out?
Yeah, I feel it was like, what are some of the recurring gimmicks? I think it's in Spider-Man history, but also like superhero comics in general and kind of where they originated in the lineage of Spider-Man. I think that's more kind of at least my philosophy in how we approached it. And you know, for the record, like, you know, the examples we're about to give, I mean, we chose them because they're the first within Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Like, so like, it's not necessarily that these are the quote unquote most gimmicky of the gimmicks. It's like, well, they did it first. And I think this is to kick this conversation off. You know, we're going to talk about something that, Dan, we have talked about multiple times on this show. We've actually reviewed 2 of these kinds of issues in real time, which is kind of shocking to me considering it's been 10 years and we've only done 2 of these. But we've talked about, I think, all of the others in one shape or form over the other. And that is, of course, the Centennial issue. So we're going to start with Amazing Spider-Man number 100, which was the original Centennial. And I have to admit, I chuckle at the fact that on the cover of this one, and this is part of the reason why we chose it, it was like, okay, so Centennial, what's the big deal? But it's advertised as the quote-unquote long-awaited 100th anniversary issue. That's right. I mean, I hear 100th anniversary, I think of 100 years, but it's not the Centennial. I don't know. It's just pure Stan Lee, like overselling. And of course, like Amazing Spider-Man number 100, it's got that iconic cover of by Romita with Spider-Man kind of, you know, crawling across the cover with all of the floating heads of guilt and villains and shame and everything else in the background. What else kind of sticks out to you about this issue, Dan?
Well, I mean, I want to say, like, I think of the Centennial issues, this is probably the least gimmicky of them all. Like, the cover is probably the most gimmicky part of the whole issue. I mean, yes, there is a story in it where Spider-Man, you know, gets rid of his powers and ends up growing extra arms. And maybe you could lump that into, like, alternate costumes as that arm.
It's a shock ending, Dan. Shocking. It is
a shock ending.
I mean, I was traumatized by it, frankly. I mean, the first time I read it, I was so traumatized by it.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Mark. Yeah, I mean, so this one doesn't really stand out to me as like the most gimmicky, but it did set the precedent. And you know. Every Centennial issue since this one has really been treated special, whether they're double-sized or extra-large issues. And this one, my understanding, I don't remember exactly, it's not any longer than a normal issue. And, you know, to the point that it had a follow-up in 101. And and also kind of saw off the creative team, and it's a bit of a mess of an issue, frankly. But that Romita cover is really iconic and has been repeated many times over the years. So I mean, in terms of like gimmick, this one is not a huge gimmick to me. It's if on anything, honestly, I think it's a bit of a letdown of an issue. Like I would kind of want something with a little more more representative of the cover on the inside. Like if I picked this up, I might have been a little disappointed. In its celebratory nature.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that because, I mean, there are moments, and this was aptly pointed out as a call-in from former Spider-Man writer Kevin Shinnick on our 100th episode of Amazing Spider Talk, where he was like, may you be visited by your villains of the past throughout your episode. And so, like, there is an acknowledgement, like, Spider-Man kind of, he fights the Kingpin and the Goblin, and like others show up, and it's kind of like he's haunted by the ghosts of Spider-Man past and whatnot. I mean, it's a little bit of a retrospective, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's not. It's probably, in terms of the actual story, beyond like the final visual of the 6-armed Spider-Man, it's probably the least memorable of all the Centennial issues that we would get over the last 60 years. Although I maybe the most recent one, 900 would pushes it down a little bit. I don't know. I guess we'll see in a few years.
I mean, who could forget this issue starts It's Morbin time? I mean, where we wouldn't have that meme without this issue.
Exactly. I mean, maybe the most apropos thing about this issue from a personal history standpoint is I bought this comic. I have a beautiful, gorgeous copy of this comic, and as I've talked about on Chasing Amazing and maybe even on the show before, Dan, it's like I don't remember where I got it. Which is shocking to me, because you would think like a comic like that, and especially in the condition that I have it in, I would remember, like, was it at a comic book show, at a comic book store? Where did I get this thing? It's like I just remember looking in my comic book boxes. I was like collating all my comics like 20, 30 years ago and be like, oh, wow, look at that. I have 100. And I have no other recollection of it. And it, like I said, it's probably one of my better looking Silver Age comics that I own. It's like a fine, very fine comic. But yeah, I mean, it set the precedent. Like you said, like from this point on, like every Centennial issue, in addition to being like double sized, like there was always some kind of like significant storyline point. Either a new character was being introduced or a character was dying off, like the burglar or Aunt May. It was usually a celebration of Spider-Man's life, and whether or not to be, I mean, this comic is aptly named to be, the Spider or the Man, and it's similar. And like I feel like future Centennials always kind of question: does he want to be Spider-Man? Does he want to be Peter? Like we've dealt with that a bunch of times. It really kind of just set the template for like the significant anniversary type story, except the anniversary is just that the comic in its chronology happened to end in 2 zeros. I mean, there's nothing else to put it. I guess when it hits 1,000, it's going to be even crazier. I don't know.
There's going to release a trade paperback into your poll list. So what do you think? Like, but before we declare whether this is gimmick or good or somewhere in between, like, what do you think of the Centennial issue, overall? Like, is that a gimmick that you're on board for? Like, do you think there's an inherent value in that goes beyond just marketing?
I do. I love it. I got to be honest. It's like,
yeah.
And maybe part of it is too, because as we've talked about many times on this show, like, one of the very first comics that I bought in real time was Amazing Spider-Man 300, and like that was such a significant comic for me. But like, it created an expectation and a desire for me as a fan that like I've come to rely on. Like when we get to 100 issues from when the last one was, you expect something special. Like, it's like, you could set your watch to it. Something big is going to happen. It's probably part of the reason why I felt let down by 900, because it was kind of not special. It felt very, oh, okay. Like the story that preceded it and followed it was more significant to me in terms of like character development and things happening. But for the most part, it's always delivered either by an amazing cover or an amazing interior. So I love it. Like as a collector, as a fan, as a reader, it's like being able to kind of like set your watch to a significant story. And like, to me, 100 issues is like, it's a worthy milestone. Like I've pushed back as like they've made like 25 and 50 and 75 significant, because it's like, well, what's 25? I mean, like in twice a month Spider-Man realm, it's a year. You know what I mean? Like you made it a year, big deal. You know what I mean? But like 100, it's a lot of issues. That's a lot of content. A lot has changed in 100 issues usually. So I love it. You? What do you think?
I mean, we've only had 9 of them, you know, so like there is still like a rarity to it, you know, even if they're coming more frequently than they used to. You know, this one's funny as a gimmick because it's the only gimmick really that I can think of. I mean, maybe we'll undo this statement the longer we go on this, but it's the kind of gimmick that you expect the comic to be better on the inside.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like normally when you see a gimmick, you're like, well, this is just going to be a way for them to drum up some money. But the Centennials have gained enough like goodwill, unlike, and I dare say it, the Annuals. Like they've garnered enough goodwill that you're like, okay, like this is probably going to be a great comic. So when it does disappoint, like 900, you know, it does feel like the odd man out. But like some of my favorite issues of Spider-Man ever are Centennial issues, you know, just rattling them off the top of my head. 300's amazing. 400 is great. 500 is heartbreaking. You know, 700 is one of the biggest twists of all time, you know, and then there's the other ones. I like 800.
800 was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, 800 is. I think I gave that like an A+ on the show. So far be it for me to discount 800. So, for me, if I got to decide this is gimmick or good, I'm very solidly in the good camp.
Yeah,
I am reluctant to award trophies to 25th issues, but the Centennials, sign me up.
I will say that I find 100 to be the most gimmicky of all the Centennial issues, but as a gimmick, it's a good gimmick. Does that work?
Yeah.
Do we want to move on to the next one?
Sure. What's our next category here, Mark?
Okay, so now we're going to talk about costume changes, and I think specifically we're going to talk about Amazing Spider-Man number 252, which is of course the introduction of the black costume. And you know, let me preface this by saying, like, you know, this is a gimmick. Like, this is funny to me. Like, I feel like, you know, and maybe this is my own navel gazing here, Dan, but like I feel like when Spider-Man has a costume change, it's more significant than other heroes, because like there have certainly been other superheroes who have had their costume changed in Marvel Comics over the years. I feel to far less fanfare. I mean, like Iron Man, you know, he was in a gold hunk of tin for the first like 3 or 4 issues, and then he became red and gold, and that was that. You know what I mean? But no one, like, they didn't make a big deal about it. It wasn't a huge thing. The Fantastic Four, they had those like the blue jumpsuits, and then during the John Byrne era, they kind of changed the costume up. Again, it didn't feel like a significant shift, but like Amazing Spider-Man number 252. I mean, first of all, they pay homage to Amazing Fantasy 15 with the cover, except he's in all black, and the black suit was part of the Marvel Secret Wars maxi series, so that was very significant. They're trying to, like, you know, sell toys and sell another series with it, and, you know, like there was a contest where a fan sent this thing in, and, you know, there's a whole lore to it that we're actually going to be discussing a bit in our season with the Falco and Friends, but at the same time, like I said, other characters I feel like have changed costumes too, but with less fanfare. And then like Spider-Man did it, and then I feel like from that point on, it became more significant when other characters did it. I don't know. Am I being like too myopic here, or what do you think?
No, and I don't think so. And I think it really relies on how bold of a change this was.
Right.
You know, to the black suit. I think if it was let's say, like from the original costume to say, the minor increments that we had seen, the removal of the web pits, or even to today's Osborn suit, I don't think the reception would have been quite the same. But the black suit was, kind of a herald of, big changes in comics. So much of what we got out of the gimmicks of the 90s, I think, really is, begins not only tied into the idea of secret wars in the events, but also how you can change up a character, whether that's, replacing them with someone else or giving them a new costume. You're right. I do think this issue was a big deal. Then that doesn't make it not a gimmick, because I don't think they did this for storytelling purposes. They may have stumbled backwards into one of the best origins for a villain in comics, right. I would dare say. But that was in no way the intention. The intention here was to sell toys and sell Secret Wars, the comic, because Spider-Man was in a new suit, and nobody there had any faith that this suit would take on like it did. And to me, that is like the ultimate gimmick. We're going to do something, no one believes in it, but we're doing it because we might be able to sell a few more comics. Tell me if I'm wrong here, Mark.
No, I think you're right. I think the significance of the black suit itself is a credit to, frankly, the creators that were working on Spider-Man at the time. Roger Stern has taken credit for being like let's make the suit alive, And Roger Stern, will forever be a brilliant comic book writer. I mean, that's a great idea. We've talked to Tom DeFalco about the fact that, when the pitch for the black suit first came in from another fan, it was like, oh, and the black suit's going to make him jump 30% higher and move 36% faster. And Tom was like, that makes no freaking sense. How are we supposed to show that? But and Tom, of course, wrote a lot of the first few stories with the black suit, and I feel like he took it and didn't make it, I feel like, derivative and stupid, for lack of a better word. It was like, okay, no, well, let's work off of what Roger did. Let's work off of what Mike Zeck and Rick Leonardi came up with artistically, and then Ron Frenz took even further. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I like the joke. It's kind of like, that old Simpsons trope. It's like Malibu Stacy with a new hat. But I feel like they do kind of start working it in. And then, of course, like you said, they kind of fell backwards into Venom. But even the stories with the symbiote coming alive and attacking and wanting to take Peter as a host, those were good stories. I mean, even before the Venom of it all happened, I felt those were fun, kind of crazy, creepy stories for a Spider-Man comic at the time. Am I overselling it?
No, I don't think so. And I do think that this has maybe some of the biggest repercussions, for the line, because I don't think Spider-Verse and all of that exists without this, right? This was the exploration of Spider-Man is completely covered in a costume, and just changing that costume in many ways changes the character. And, we would get that explored probably in its most bold in the Spider-Man 3 movie, where it turns him into an angsty guy, which was never really in the comics, although people like to think it was. I do think it opens the kind of Pandora's box for exploring just how much Spider-Man as a character is influenced by the design. And now the real appeal, and I think the real appeal of Spider-Verse, more than there being other characters, is people love seeing different spider costumes, and, if we're going to come down on whether this is a good gimmick or just a gimmick, I think it's really moved away from being a good gimmick to being just a flat gimmick nowadays. I feel like we've gotten a lot of costumes that have come and gone as a way to boost sales. And some writers do it better than others. The worst example is probably the Threats and Menaces costume from the Nick Spencer run, which was just, one, flat out ugly, and two, had an interesting premise behind it, but was ignored almost immediately and was really just a way to sell a bunch of extra covers. is the Osborn suit the same way right now? I think it's a little more built into the narrative, but the design is like really a minor upgrade. And so like these ones feel less essential and less bold than say like the black suit. They're still trading maybe a little too heavily on like familiar iconography than like being as bold as saying, let's throw all that out and invent a new icon in the black suit, which is not easy to do. But if it were up to me and Spider-Man was changing costumes, I would want it to be a bigger, bolder choice, that like would allow the character to stretch a little bit. And I think within its boldness, be less of a gimmick. I don't know how you feel about all that.
No, I agree. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Dan, like most of these costume changes that we've had since have been unmemorable, or if they are memorable, they're memorable for kind of the absurdity of it all. Like I like when I think of other alternate costumes, I always think of what was once described to me as, and the expression has stuck with me ever since, like Web of Spider-Man 100, the disco ball of justice Spider-Man costume. But like,
which didn't even last a full issue. It's in like maybe 10 panels.
No, but that's the thing. Like, I mean, like there have been even costumes that like I feel are well conceived and well used, like the big time like stealth suit and stuff like that. Like they're totally unmemorable. You know what I mean? Like they're just like pieces in a Spider-Verse like cameo show. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's all they are at this point. I mean, heck, even the black suit itself has like when it reappears now, it's a gimmick. You know, it's like, you know, it's back in black. It's like let's get Peter back to being really stormy and angry, and it's like. Whatever, you know what I mean? Like there's no real utility to it anymore, you know? So this is kind of the opposite of what we were talking about in the Centennials, where it's like, I feel like the black suit and how it was used and where it led, in terms of the symbiote and Venom, was brilliant and one of the most well-conceived ideas that ever happened with this character. But I feel like everything that has transpired since, it's not even just a pale imitation. It's just like, it's just not good. You know what I mean? It's very gimmicky to the nth degree. So like this is a good gimmick that went bad, in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about it, but
I mean, I think it's a good gimmick that went bad specifically in the past 10 years of our show. Yes. You know, I remember being excited about the new big time suits, right?
Right.
But now when I see a redesign on the cover and them selling variant covers of it, I tend to think, oh, it's probably not going to be a great story. Like it's going to be some gimmicky story about it. Like, I don't know if you remember seeing the Iron Spider suit for the first time. Like it got like a front page, you know, New York Times image. And I remember my parents showing it to me in the newspaper and being like, check this out. And me having like a visceral reaction. Like,
no, you're
what
right.
is
you're
that?
right.
You know, like, but then ultimately coming to love it as its own thing. I just don't think that the gimmick has kind of almost worn thin now. Like
right.
Press coverage doesn't cover it like that. I think it's because it's become far too common. Than it used to be when it was like saved for something, and whenever it came out, it was a bold change. Like that Iron Spider suit was really different, you know. So yeah, I think this is a good gimmick gone bad.
There you go.
And that's where I will rest my case on this one.
Okay. Well, our next topic is one that is of little significance to anyone. I don't even know why we're talking about it on the show, Dan. I mean, like no one cares about this. It's so guys, I don't know if you're aware, but in the 80s, Peter Parker married Mary Jane. Can you imagine? Like there was a wedding issue.
I have memory, like it was once a strong memory, but it has faded. You know, like almost like overnight. Like it just never happened.
Right. I mean, like I just feel like. I mean, like, I get them, like, living together and stuff, but, like, married? I don't. I
mean,
guess so.
It would lean dangerously close to making the character unrelatable. I mean, like, who gets married these days?
I know.
mean,
I know.
Like, how would anybody find a way to connect with a character that is married to somebody else, happily or unhappily?
Right. But in all seriousness, let's talk about the wedding. But not as the marriage, because I just don't feel like getting spammed by people on Twitter right now, although it's going to probably happen anyway. They probably hear it as we're talking, as we're recording this, and I'm getting spammed as we talk.
I see them outside my window, just
there's
hashtag Peter MJ.
Like, if I can get 1,000 signatures, let's talk about the wedding issue, because, like, guys, say what you will about the wedding, but the wedding issue, they did you showed me the poster from a couple of days ago, Dan. You texted me this. Like, they did a whole thing at Shea Stadium with the 86 Mets. I mean, the cocaine must have been abundant at the wedding. I gotta tell you that much. But with like really bad costumes, and like the Hulk and Firestar and Iceman, because there was an animated series going on. I mean, the whole thing was Stan Lee was at a con, and he went to Jim Shooter, was like, let them get married, and Jim Shooter's like, yeah, Stan, let's get them married, and then they made a comic out of it. This is a gimmick, right, Dan? Like what are we even doing here?
It's 100% a gimmick. Like it was a multimedia event, which we're going to talk about for another one of our gimmicks down the line here. It was a big multimedia event, drew a lot of attention, and people still react to it today, despite me having forgotten it. Like, this was a formative, big event that drew a lot of people to Spider-Man comics, and specifically the comics, and what was really special about it was kind of like, not only this, multimedia event within the comics, but you had people like portraying these characters in real life for one of the first times in a major public, way. You had fashion designers brought in, it was like a really big to-do, got coverage in newspapers. It's not the kind of gimmick they do today, but it's not entirely different than some of the marketing gimmicks that they might do, around announcing new comics and big events in comics today. But it makes it wholly unique. I mean, as a gimmick, as a way to sell comics.
Yeah, and I feel like, okay, like prior to this, the big wedding in comics was Reed and Sue in the Fantastic Four. They did that in an annual, which clearly it didn't count in Fantastic Four lore. But other than the not counting part of it, they made a big deal of it. But I feel like after the Spider-Man issue, which was also done in an annual, so it doesn't count. I feel like a lot of like comic creators, like they made like, it was like special edition issues, like Superman, it was like a special wedding album. I mean, like they like I again, like I could be being myopic here, but I feel like Spider-Man doing it when he did it kind of like set the bar. I mean, to for others. I mean, there's even a variant cover for this. There's like there's a version of the cover with Peter and MJ in civilian clothes, and then there's Spider-Man marrying Mary Jane, which is just kind of weird if you think about it. I don't know. What do you think?
No. I mean, this is an early appearance of like an early variant. I mean, is this the first variant?
It might be, or among the first for sure.
Yeah.
For certain. Yeah.
And in terms of the legacy of this, we're still getting these marriage issues today, even in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. I mean, not to mention ASM 600, which was a combo of Aunt May marrying J. Jonah Jameson Sr. But then we've got the Randy and the Beetle marriage coming up soon in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, and that's going to be its own thing. So the marriage issue has become like, this is not the first, like you said. There was the Fantastic Four one, but this was like a big media hoopla. And let's be clear, Mark, if you read the comics at the time, this felt like completely out of nowhere for these characters. Not that it
Right.
was entirely unbelievable, and we've done a whole episode with our wives on this issue. But, you know, if you were reading it in real time, the issue that came out prior to this featured Peter sleeping with Felicia.
Right.
You know? So, like, yeah, it's not outside the realm of believability that, like, Peter and MJ had gotten to this point, you know, of sharing their secrets with each other and maturing as characters, that they could get married. But this was not a natural progression for the story in this exact moment.
Well, I mean, how could it be? I mean, how could it be? Isn't like MJ like a sister to Peter? I mean, it's just very strange.
You're looking to really start something here. So, like, what do you think? I mean, like, we've not gotten Peter marrying somebody else. So, like, this is not an ongoing gimmick.
No,
like,
no.
you know, do we think this comic, which is undoubtedly a gimmick, has it become good, or was it good?
Look, I'm just gonna like lean into like my heel tendencies here. Like I'm just full blown like Doc Ock here when I talk about like the marriage and stuff. Like to me, this is all a gimmick. I mean, like it was to me, it was poorly set up from the get go. I mean, it was also like I don't think we mentioned like it was meant to kind of synchronize with the comic book newspaper strip. Like that was part of the reason why like they wanted to do, we'll get them married in one of them, we'll get them married in the other. And like you said, like, you know, I feel like marriage comics in general, it's like, you know, it's kind of like when you're watching like a vaudevillian comedy and they wheel out a big cake. It's like, you know that someone is going to like end up in the cake. Like it's the only purpose for the cake to exist. Right. And I feel like with a superhero wedding, its only purpose is for like the villain to show up and crash it. You know what I mean? Like that's why you have weddings in superhero comics. Like it's got nothing to actually do with like character development. It's to set up another story. So you know, to me, this is very gimmicky. I'm not saying the marriage was gimmicky, but the wedding issue is gimmicky. And I to me, like I don't see a lot of long-term value, from a storyline quality standpoint with issues like these. Or do you agree? Am I being too heelish here, or what do you think?
There's just so much to unpack here, you know, like, and how do you separate the wedding from the marriage entirely? Like, there's a really great case to be made that, like, the character of MJ as we know it would not have the lasting power that she has without this issue. Like, something about being elevated to Peter Parker's wife, like, makes her, like, much more essential part of the cast. Because remember, she'd been, like, in and out of the cast and missing for 50 plus issues at a time, you know, prior to coming back and in the Stern run. And, you know, this kind of solidifies her there. And without this, I don't think we get, like, you know, the Mary Jane in the Spider-Man movies, you know, like we don't see the character with the kind of pop culture status that she has, which I think a lot of it is bestowed upon how big of a deal they made out of this. So, you know, is it a gimmick? Yes. Has there been good side effects of said gimmick? Absolutely. You know, and as much as there are, you know, the things that drive us crazy about, like, the people who have maybe put too much into the Peter and MJ marriage. But, you know, for me, like, I like my Peter Parker with Mary Jane. I think it's like, you know, one of the all-time relationships, and I do think that relationship doesn't exist in the way that it does without an issue like this. You know, being in our mind, and like there is something about something that pervades into greater pop culture that has a way of almost like calcifying something. So, yeah, it's a gimmick, and I'll say it's good. Fine. I don't know. It's a really weird one to weigh in on. Don't do this every week. Like, he shouldn't be married many times. In fact, he probably shouldn't have been married altogether. But, like, if it means getting, like, MJ as, like, a core part of Spider-Man lore, I'm for that. I'm for
Okay.
it.
All right. You took me on a journey there, Dan, and that's what we would expect in a 10th anniversary episode. All right.
Sure. Why not?
So let's talk about the new number one. I mean, like, look, we almost had that today when we talked about, we had available Alan ready to come on as a superstar creative team. I would think, he used to edit the film section of the Village Voice. I mean, who are you, Dan? I mean, you can't get new number one better than that, right? I mean, so
it would have been a real upgrade for the show, and I'm sorry that I'm not actually deceased Dan Glavaston. It would, maybe I just moved to San Francisco with my wife and child and leave you and Alan, to continue here. I mean, it would have been. It was the move that should have happened, but nobody higher up was daring enough to pull it off.
There you go.
They had to bring me back.
There you go.
But what are you gonna do?
But beyond that, I'm actually talking about the launch of Adjectiveless Spider-Man #1 by writer-artist Todd McFarlane, who prior to this was artist Todd McFarlane, but we wanted to get him to write as well so we could sell as many sweet comics as we can. And they did. It was at the time the greatest selling comic of all time until it was displaced by Jim Lee and Chris Claremont's X-Men #1, Adjectiveless X-Men #1. I guess that was the gimmick, was they just took the adjective out. But it was also the new series with the multiple variant covers with the big superstar artists and/or writer creative combos and this was early 90s when they did this, and Spider-Man #1 is about as supernova as it gets in terms of comics. But what can we say about the comics inside, Dan, besides doom, 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 doom? Because that's all I think of when I think of these comics.
They're not bad comics, but they're not good comics.
You're very generous, Dan. I mean, for full disclosure, Spider-Man #1 was actually the debut of my Gimmick or Good column, and I came firmly on the side of Gimmick for this comic. Of course, I was taking it from the advantage of we had a gold cover, a silver cover, a platinum cover. Then we had variants that weren't actually variants. There was the blue lizard variant. Are you familiar with this, Dan?
Yes, I am familiar with it.
Yeah,
it's on my look to find list.
Yeah, it's a printing error, folks. A printing error. Yeah. There was too much cyan in the printer, and the lizard looks a little bluer than he should have. And someone decided that's a variant. I'm like Oprah and turkeys. You get a variant. Everyone gets a variant. It is very representative of the speculator bubble, right? Yes.
Everybody thought they were going to get a copy of this and X-Men 1 and the Death of Superman and retire on that issue. And now they still sell for more money than I thought that they would sell for.
I was say
everybody has one, but
I feel like where the market for these books now is, and we could talk about this speculator bubble at some point, is if you could find a CGC copy of this book in a 9.8 or something like that, it sells for a lot. I've seen that in a couple. I'll see CGC comics, CGC versions of this comic at comic book shows, and I'm just Dad, I have 4 of these in my long box at home. I mean, it's just come on.
Yes, but are they 9.8s, Mark?
No, they're not 9.8s. They're because I read them because I was a fanboy for McFarlane as a kid, and I was like, oh my God, look at that! This is so great. How many points of articulation are there?
So Mark, you can speak to this directly because I was not that kid,
Yes.
and because I was. If I was born, I was barely born. And, so to me, looking back on this, not being there, it seems like this was an inevitability, right? Todd McFarlane was such a superstar. His work on Spider-Man, this is a no-brainer more than some of the gimmick #1s we get today. This #1 felt like something because Todd had so much heat behind him. To not do this would have been silly. And the sales proved you know, that decision was really wise.
Right. I mean, like, look, like, if you want like super well written and intelligent comics, this is not it. But like, this is a moment in pop culture history that cannot be erased. You know what I mean? Like you said, like Todd McFarlane was it at this point, and you know he took the it here, and then eventually took it to Image and made Spawn a household name. You know what I mean? So like, it's just like. This is one of those things that, like you said, you'd be stupid not to do it. Like why wouldn't Marvel want money?
Yeah, and the number one, it was not even really novel, right? Because like just a couple of years earlier, we had Web of number one, right? And it was just not the same heat, even though I prefer that cover immensely over this cover.
Right.
But like Web of number one was not the sales juggernaut that this was. This was purely, I mean, I think the number one helps, right? It was a big part of the marketing, but like, and the industry had changed by the time that this book had come out. But like, it really was like selling a book on the back of the new superstar creator, right?
Correct.
In Todd McFarlane. So this was a unique combo in a way that like, I don't know that we've gotten a number one in the world of Spider-Man since with this level of, like big name attached to it.
Well, clearly you're not a fan of the creator of Lost, J.J. Abrams.
Okay,
yeah,
well, I guess you're right. I should have known because that's whatever volume 3 of this title. J.J. Abrams Spider-Man. And fans of the show will know I am not a fan of J.J. Abrams. The filmmaker, but so what do you think? Like, even though this was probably like the peak of the mountain of number ones, and creator, teams launching the book, new number ones have become, I mean, whatever. We're on volume 6 of Amazing Spider-Man now,
right?
And we were on volume 2. For the first 50 years of the comic, we only had 2 volumes, and in the past 10 years during our time covering this book, we've seen 4 volume shifts. So this is something that has become increasingly common, but has almost become less of a like. I mean, it's definitely an onboarding place for new creators, but that seems to be the bigger emphasis is. This is a good place to jump on, right. And as we move to almost like a seasonal model of comics, rather than like we're gonna blow you away with this. I don't know. It's somewhere in between nowadays.
Yeah, I look at this. I think you have to look at it from 2 different levels here. I mean, in terms of the actual like the new number one of it all, like my personal perspective, Dan, is I find reboots and renumberings and legacy numbering or going back to like old, like what do you call it, like new numberings and stuff, like I think it's a crutch. Like yes, it's a new jumping on point because it's a lazy way to create a new jumping on point. It's like like the old adage used to be from Stan Lee that you got to treat every comic like it's somebody's first comic. With that approach, hypothetically, any comic can be a jumping on point if you just get into it. And like, personally speaking now, like there are comics out there. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's any good. And then I look at it, I'm like, oh, it's up to issue 7. No, I'm not even gonna bother. You know what I mean? Because I know like I'll be lost. So I'll just go back, read it in Marvel Unlimited, and catch up. And to me, like I said, like that's not a good thing for me, for the industry. Like, and having to renumber in order to get a short bump because you happen to catch somebody's attention who might be interested in that character or the creative team at that point in time. Like, to me, like it shows a structural issue in the system that's problematic to me. So that's the first part. So I find it to be very gimmicky in that regard. Like I feel like just write comics so that I can jump in at any point, and it shouldn't need a number one to draw me in or not. in terms of the superstar creator, again, it kind of depends. I feel like if you're looking strictly through the prism of Spider-Man, it's been very hit or miss over the years. Like you have, we joked about J.J. Abrams. I mean, that series was terrible. But certainly that was a draw, was J.J. Abrams. I mean, maybe on a different note, you had J. Michael Straczynski from Babylon 5 coming on to Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 at like issue 30. That was certainly a superstar creator with John Romita Jr., who was like at the peak of his powers at that point before he got even better. Like impossibly.
Possibly, yeah.
And you're like, okay, so there's a good creative super team. And then you have Kevin Smith, who like rejuvenated Daredevil, but then did like a Black Cat series and which was truncated by like 3 years or whatever the hell it was. And you're like, okay, never mind. I didn't need Kevin Smith to be doing that. Like he should just direct like very mediocre movies about New Jersey, maybe. I don't know. So it's like, again, like it can be good. But from my vantage, it rarely is. So I find a lot of this to be gimmicky. I like it hasn't worked for me more often than not, both the new number ones and the superstar creative teams.
It's funny because I feel like the world of comics, the superstars only draw people from within the world of comics, whereas like, back in the day, I feel like there was maybe because comic audiences were bigger, like an issue would regularly sell over 100,000 copies, whereas today that would be like considered like a huge milestone in terms of sales, that like these creators were much bigger deals. But like nowadays when I see like a famous person come onto a book, like let's say Armando Iannucci is writing a issue of Spider-Man or whatever, I tend to go,
or Ta-Nehisi Coates doing Black Panther or Captain America.
I tend to think it's going to be really bad, know. And like I thought Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther was okay. I thought his Captain America was god awful, and it got a front page New York Times, thing like I described earlier, and even I shared it. I was super excited about it, because I thought, oh my gosh, this great guy. He's an amazing writer. Yeah. I've read all of his books. Like, what is he going to have to say about Captain America? And it turns out he's not a great comic creator. Not much. Yeah. I mean, like, I think he did have a lot to say, but it didn't come through in the manner of comics. And so I think the industry has kind of learned its lesson a little bit on that, which is to say, like, let's hire people who know comics to make comics. But it means diminishing returns in regards to like how much your superstar creator being put on a book really means, something like, in a just world, Ryan Otley being brought onto Amazing Spider-Man after doing Invincible for 10 years should have been like the biggest deal in the world. And it was really a small, sales point, on the title. But anyway, I have less of a problem with the number ones. I just think the world has changed, and the Brian Michael Bendis of it all, the writing for the trades, has really changed the industry. And I don't think altogether for the worse. Like, I think in some ways a lot of the storytelling has matured when it's done well. And in other ways, you're right. Not every issue can be picked up and be your number one. But it would mean not getting things like Ultimate Spider-Man and stuff like that. And there are individual issues of that you could pick up and be your number one. And it kind of, different writers do different things. To me, the invention of legacy numbering is the ultimate fix. Like, I couldn't be bothered to complain about whether or not we get a number one, so long as like there's a way for me to keep track of where I am in a title across multiple volumes, and make it easy for me to go back through it all. The problem it really is when you keep rebooting number ones over and over and over again. Like, would I have loved this ongoing Jed MacKay Black Cat series to just be Black Cat without all the Iron Cats and just have that be an arc of Black Cat? Yeah. But I also understand that like the number ones bring in readers. And like, again, it's that Tom Brennan interview that we did that changed everything for me. Like,
Right.
if it gets more people to read it, I don't really even care what it says on the cover.
Right.
You know, so long as they're not like doing it gimmick wise.
Yeah,
you know?
I get that. It's just, to me, it's like I hate the fact that you're creating like an inorganic access point. You know, you mentioned the Gimmicks Black Cat. Like, one of my favorite like non-Spider-Man books right now is it's the Jason Aaron Punisher series. And you know, like, it's a finite. It's what, 12 issues they're gonna make it, or 10 or 12 or whatever it is.
I think it keeps getting extended, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. It's excellent. I love it. It's like my favorite non-Zeb Wells JR book right now. Like, let me be frank. But I happen to like, because like I was like, ooh, Jason Aaron writing a Punisher story, and this hook sounds interesting. Let me sub to this before issue 1 came out, and I was able to do it, like, get it from the get-go. But like, if I like heard people talking about this series the way I'm hearing about it now, and like decided to try and get into it at 6 issues in, I'd have no idea what is going on, and that's frustrating. You know what I mean? Like I would be like turned off to it, because I would not be getting to experience these comics. And it's like, how do we solve this all together? Like, yes, like the legacy numbering helps with like the long-term fans of a series, but like if you just want to like check in on a book, like sometimes it takes you 3 or 4 issues before you catch wind of the fact that a book is good, you know? Like, oh wow, let me check this out. Oh wait, I don't have any clue what's going on, and now I have to wait to like.
Well, I mean, I do think, like, this is a whole other topic, but I do think the existence of Marvel Unlimited, the digital marketplace, which is in a really bad place right now, and like the existence of trades does help solve that problem considerably. Now, that's not to say Marvel's trades are discernible at all, because they are a confusing mess, especially when compared to like DC, which I think actually does a good job of keeping things recirculated and giving them good numbering. Well, that's not to say that they do the initial publishing of them well, because they're super delayed. They're always in hardcover, and then the soft cover maybe never comes. But a whole other topic. But I do think that like that every comic is someone's first comic has been shifted to this sort of like ongoing storytelling thing. And like, I don't know that we can lay this at the hands of Spider-Man #1, but you can see the origins of that stuff really starting there, which is like, we got to bring on someone new to sell something hot, quick, and, you know, and all of these industry trends have kind of snowballed into the direction that we're in right now, which makes comics fairly inaccessible. I agree, you know, but I do think that there are options. I just wish they were better advertised and more accessible in general. I don't know. So how do we come down on this one? Gimmick or good?
I say gimmick. And
I say gimmick as well.
Okay.
But I do think there can be good that comes from giving people a clean #1 where they can go, let me jump on here, especially in today's comics where, like you said, not every one of them is like the best one to start with.
All right. Well, let's move on before people find this 10th anniversary episode to lack an access point because it's 4.5 hours long.
Every segment is someone's first segment.
There you go.
Yeah.
We are now going to talk about the mega event crossover, and this is I think even more than the wedding gimmick that we talked about earlier. I think this is probably the one we're going to catch the most heat for, Dan, because when I talk about mega event crossovers and Spider-Man, the storyline that immediately comes to mind is Maximum Carnage. And what is Maximum Carnage? I mean, besides, from my perspective, god awful. It is, it was a storyline that like spans multiple titles, including newly created titles. So we got some new #1s out of this one, but also pulled in several characters from like non-Spider-Man series, like Captain America, Deathlock, Cloak and Dagger, Iron Fist, Wally and the Beaver. I mean, like, they were all in this book. And we have since seen this this gimmick in the world of Spider-Man in things like Spider Island. We have seen it in Dark Web. We have seen it in I mean, where haven't we seen
everything?
It, Dan? Yeah,
Venom Inc.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, you name it.
These books that make you like follow. It's not even just following Spider-Man anymore. It's following as many characters as Marvel deems necessary to follow to keep up with this storyline. Although Maximum Carnage was confined to just the Spider books, I feel like it kind of like opened Pandora's box for that kind of crossover event where it was like, let's just pull as much in as we can. I don't know. What do you think about the Spider-Man crossover?
I mean, to call something with 14 issues that you need to read all of them a gimmick and that be a controversial statement is silly on the face of it. I mean, it's 14. It's not even like a good number.
Right.
Like what is 14? You know, like I think I've seen 14 parts of anything, you know, being the story before. It's hard for me because like Maximum Carnage was a huge deal. Like The Wedding, it had a ton of like extraneous stuff going on. Like I owned the video game of Maximum Carnage.
That red cartridge, man. You can't beat that red cartridge.
It was a big deal. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, like you saw Maximum Carnage commercials and it was a big multimedia event. And as a kid, you know, that had just gotten into Spider-Man comics, this is maybe the thing that like solidly locked me into Spider-Man comics because of the cultural cachet of it. And so like a lot of my fandom, I think, can be attributed to Maximum Carnage, which I thought was the coolest thing at the time. You know, like there's no denying it. I thought it was super cool. Does it deserve to be on like the CBR list, like the top 5 Spider-Man comics of all time, which I think it was nominated or listed as? No, it's not a good story. Now, it's a better story than some of the other crossover events we've gotten. There's at least a heart or like a thematic idea to this story,
right,
which I think has been largely forgotten in the years since. But no, this is like a solid gimmick, and not a good one. You know, like if there is one that is probably the most has the most negative consequences associated with it to the Spider-Man line and probably the Marvel line in general, it would be Maximum Carnage. I can't think of. We just got done talking about Dark Web. I can't think of something that when it shows up, this like multi-line wide thing, like that I hate more than this gimmick. You know, the essential reading across multiple titles. The only other time that I feel like this has been done well is in the Superior era, and even those weren't essential reading. That was just a line of really good books, that were like had their heart pumping from a really good idea, managed by an editorial team that like made sure that every book was quality. That is the odd duck. Like for the most part, it is mostly garbage.
I was gonna say Spider Island because like
okay,
I enjoyed the breadth of Spider Island, which like it was funny like that storyline came out very early in my Chasing Amazing days, and like I remember writing about it in terms of through the prism of, oh God, but Maximum Carnage, what is this going to be? You know what I mean? Because like I had scars from Maximum Carnage, but it's like
important to note on that Spider Island note is it's the same writers and editorial team, who pulled it off twice.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. But like, you know, what is it? Is it just that Maximum Carnage itself as a concept, as a storyline is meh? I mean, maybe is it the fact that like all of the villains beyond Carnage himself were very C or D list or lower? Yeah, that had something to do with it. But like you said, I think it was like, I think setting the template, and we're about to get to this in terms of the next storyline we're going to discuss, of like having to make the commitment to Spider-Man being like not even just it was a the weekly saga, but then like also these other books and things that you had to keep up with. To me, like that's setting the expectations on your readers to be way too high. You know, like you're going from reading a monthly book or maybe 2 monthly books about somebody to like having to just buy 5 or 6 books a month just to keep up with a storyline. That's just like, it's unreasonable in my opinion. I mean, like, you know, heck, Brand New Day was 3 a month, but that was it. They didn't have other books at the time. You know what I mean? So like to kind of put that level of expectation on your readers to keep up and like, you know, talk about lack of access. Like that's, you know, like if you can't even like buy Amazing Spider-Man month to month and know what's going on because you're not reading the 5 other books that tie into it, that's to me very unfortunate as a publishing company to set that up, you know? So that's, yeah, it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick, and it's a bad gimmick, and I think it set a really bad precedent for the industry.
And yeah, I mean, just speaking as a kid at the time, I couldn't buy all those books, you know, like, and it made them more desirable, you know, on my behalf. Like I wanted to have all 14 parts of Maximum Carnage. And it elevated the book in my mind. But again, I don't think that that's healthy, even if it does get the 5-year-olds out there like, Mom, you got to buy me all the things, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, it's not even just the financial aspect, Dan. I mean, like I was 12, 13 years old at the time when Maximum Carnage came out. I didn't drive. The nearest comic book shop to me was like a 10-minute drive from my parents' house. Like I couldn't get them to take me to the comic book store every week to get the comics. So like it was so frustrating. So anyway,
yeah, and people ask why kids aren't reading comics now. You know, like there is a sort of accessibility thing, which it seems to be a reoccurring topic that we're getting to here. Now, I'm going to set up the next one because, like, and I think we've talked about this many times. I would argue without Maximum Carnage, we would never get the mess of the next one, which is the Clone Saga, which I would like basically categorize as an unending crossover. It's like Maximum Carnage, but like as status quo for years on end, you know? So it's like, can you keep up with this? And, you know, it was a weekly Spider-Man saga, and it's the one thing that drew me out of comics shortly after I got obsessed with Spider-Man and pushed me to getting back issues because I could not keep up with this drama as a kid. And even today, you know, I mean, like, obviously we do our show now and we would keep up with it. And in many ways, I feel like we're kind of living in this era now, you know, where you've got like books like Gold Goblin where, you know, something really essential, I won't reveal it, happens in that book, like outside the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. And it feels like we're kind of always living in the Clone Saga now. And I think it's a really dangerous precedent. Mark, you know, you've done some revisionist takes on the Clone Saga over the years.
Easy. I mean, let me preface before I get into my takes on the Clone Saga. I feel what's also significant about the Clone Saga and kind of makes it distinct from Maximum Carnage is it's like a gimmick within a gimmick because yes, it's the weekly crossover, but it's also like it's the major status quo shift, which was Peter and, you know, MJ gets pregnant and Peter is going to go off with her. It's the like, and this was a huge trope in the 90s. It's the replacement hero gimmick, which was, you know, Ben Reilly was taking the webs from Peter, you know, kind of similar to like what we had with, like, we had 4 different Superman in the Return of Superman, and we had what's his name taking over for Batman from Bruce Wayne in Nightfall. Azrael was taking over from Bruce Wayne in Nightfall, and we had a new Green Lantern in the 90s, and, you know, and Wally West, well, prior to the 90s, you had Wally West taking over for Barry Allen in The Flash. But, like, it was, you know, kind of, like I said, gimmick within gimmick within gimmick. I mean, it was like, you know, the gimmick, inception, if you will. And yes, I have had some, what you would refer to as revisionist history with the Clone Saga. Not so much because I like the Clone Saga now, but, like, you know, I feel like I am one of those people, you know, I'm probably the reason why they have brought back Ben Reilly, because I'm one of those people who's like, actually, there is some good value stories to be mined from the Clone Saga. As a whole, it is a failure. And the gimmick, the most gimmicky gimmick that ever gimmicked. Like let's just
Yeah.
put that out there. But like there are individual stories and mini arcs within the Clone Saga where you're like, actually, that's a really interesting point. Or
It's so gimmicky, it had to gimmick itself out of existence. You know, like it was so gimmicky that like they got so trapped in the gimmick, they had to come up with a gimmick to get them out of it, which is like resurrecting a long dead character and undoing the gimmick that was selling the books by saying, actually, Ben Reilly isn't Peter Parker, you know, like all of that nonsense, you know, which is typically how Spider-Man mysteries end in some kind of weird gimmick. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to really come down and say this is a good gimmick because it's the thing that drove me out of comics as a young person, or out of like collecting comics as an ongoing medium as a young person. I mean, in many ways, it's responsible for me going into back issues, which was a wonderful discovery. But I don't think that was the aim that they had at the time. And at the same time, I have to acknowledge my experience of this wasn't typical. Sales went way up during this gimmick. And so more people were reading this stuff than ever before until a point, in which case, you know, the book, you know, was one of the last hold-ons as Marvel was going bankrupt. And then you saw the Spider-Man line just completely flatline. I don't know if it was because of this gimmick, which, you know, I think was fairly well received at the time, to a certain point. I don't know, Mark, where do you come down on this? Like, you know, I don't want them to continue doing clone sagas. Even though I said I feel like
we seem like we get one every few years, though. You know,
it's
like
true, yeah. Like I side solidly. This is the gimmick of all gimmicks.
No, I agree. It's the gimmick of all gimmicks. It's the most dangerous precedent I think we have in Spider-Man comics. I mean, you know, like, and frankly, one that, you know, it established a template that I think we got in Kindred a few years ago,
Yes.
which is this idea of like, well, something seems to be sparking an interest. How do we keep it going? You know, because people are into it and want to buy comics. You know, like it's you know.
I mean, including the threat of a major status quo shift, that was ultimately never realized.
Right.
And it was just a way to sell books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you, Dan, like this took me out of comics for a while. I mean, like there is a very distinct period that I talk about on Chasing Amazing where I just stopped buying comics altogether. I mean, it was the combination of, again, the accessibility, just the burnout of the comics, you know, the incomprehensibility of the story itself, that really didn't get picked up again until the JMS era on Spider-Man. So, like, I mean, that's like a 5-year gap. I mean, you know, like being in college didn't help either because, again, like you got a lot of was going on in my life at the time. But like,
well, that beer money took away from the comics money.
I mean, you know, right? Exactly.
This is a gimmick that's going on. It continues in your life, Mark.
I mean, well, now I can have both. You know, like that's the bottom line.
Look at that. A true adult can have both beer and their superhero comics.
All right. Anywho, I'm on Gimmick. Let's go on. Is this our last one? Yes, it is our last one. And Dan, like, this is kind of the gimmick, and this is a fitting finale here that brought us together, don't you think?
Yeah, and started off this episode, which is the death of a hero.
Yes.
This is me casting myself as the hero. So we are talking about Amazing Spider-Man 700 and Superior Spider-Man #1. Although certainly not the first time that Spider-Man died. You know, like, you know, the other one was just a few years earlier in the other storyline where we got new powers and the death of a hero. And
right.
That's certainly a gimmick. So I think less successful than the kind of maybe it predating the Twitter era, but like ASM 700 and Superior Spider-Man 1 felt like the real death of a hero, and then launching a series on the back of that. It's Nightfall on steroids. It's the darker hero on the death of the main hero. You know, it's a huge gimmick to sell a bunch of comics, and it sold a lot of comics. But I dare say, Mark, this one is a good gimmick because it came from the story first. This was not an editorially pushed thing. This was Dan Slott saying, I've got a great idea for a story, and letting that story dictate the number one and everything that came afterwards. What say you?
No, I agree. I mean, look, on its face, this is 100% a gimmick. You know, like you're killing a hero, even though everybody knows that is a very finite proposition. You know, like no one except the craziest, looniest Spider-Man fans who are probably now, you know, complaining about the marriage on Twitter, thought that this was real, you know, or real in the long term. You know what I mean? Like you know, despite Dan Slott going to Comic Cons and being like, he's dead. I tell you, you know, I mean, no one thought he was dead. In fact, I mean, I was like, oh, isn't there a new Amazing Spider-Man movie coming out in 2014? I bet he's alive by then. Literally the month the movie comes out, he's alive. Anyway.
I will say, though, Mark, I remember, and I do hold this over you every few shows, which is your blog post saying, like, I'm going to quit collecting Amazing Spider-Man comics after 700. It's the end of I consider it the end of my run, right? And you had a huge mea culpa because... And I don't blame you for this because you saw it as the gimmick, right? You were like, this has to be the gimmick. And then the story won you over, right?
Correct.
And so you kind of like backtracked on, like, are they willing to lean into this gimmick so hard that they're going to kill off the hero and be kind of shitty about it? You know, and then you realize there's actually a story here. Did you want to talk about that at all? I know you've talked about it on the show before, but like, it does lean hard into our gimmick conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I look, like that is the key right there, Dan. I mean, it was like, if this was just like a gimmick designed to juice sales that didn't actually have any like heart and soul to it, then it I don't know if it would have completely killed off my interest in the character, but it would have really dampened it significantly. You know what I mean? Like, I think at that point I would have been like, all right, well, let me just go collect, you know, my remaining back issues that I had at that point, which was like a small handful. And, you know, I'll never like do something stupid like launch a podcast about this character, because like who would what would I even talk about, and who would be the person I would even talk to?
Certainly not the guy leaving weird comments in my posts.
Absolutely not. But and I think you even commented on that post about like the prelude to 700. I was like, what is this? But like, I think like it's worth noting too. Like, I think like Amazing Spider-Man was at like 694 or 695 at that point. Like, we hadn't even gotten to Dying Wish yet. Okay, so like let's be real here. But yeah, like the story hooked me because it was like, okay, they're gonna do something really interesting here and different, and it's gonna be an exploration about how to like what is Spider-Man and who is Spider-Man. I always kind of joke that I feel like 700 into Superior was more about what I hoped Spider-Verse would be than like what Spider-Verse ended up being in terms of like a meditation on Spider-Man and Peter Parker. So yeah, I like 100%. Like, the story brought me in, but like that is not to say though that I saw this as a gimmick from the beginning, and it is a gimmick, but it's a really well executed gimmick. And yeah, you talked about the other, or heck, even the Clone Saga, which wasn't a death of the hero, but it was like the removal of the hero, and like that was, to me, that was like not well executed. Even if like the premise of like, oh, he's gonna go be happy with Mary Jane, like how can you have Peter Parker be happily ever after? You know what I mean? Like that to me, like, what's the point of that? That it just can't be. And we kind of, we had the death of Ultimate Peter, which I thought was good, but like, again, like, I feel like it's kind of a cop out to have these serial superhero comics to be finite in nature. It's just supposed to go. It goes and goes and goes until we're all cockroaches. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like what are we doing here?
You paint such a vivid picture, Mark.
I mean, but like, that's like, if you actually, like, if there is someone out there that is like, no, there is an end for these characters, I don't want to know who that person is that thinks that. Like
well,
it just goes.
I would rebuff that with Kirkman's Invincible, which has a concrete ending and is brilliant.
Okay.
Which he intended for it to be an ongoing and passing it off to someone, and it is a brilliant ending. But I think that's just not in the cards for Spider-Man. Like, it's just not. Like, Marvel relies on him too much, as a character.
I really hope that Spider-Man goes for hundreds of years past my existence on this earthly plane here, Dan. That's all I gotta say.
They're just gonna AI us into reviewing those issues,
right?
Rivet gun, rivet gun, rivet gun.
There you go.
But what I wanted to say, thinking about this is, the thing about people getting upset, I know there's that whole thing, like, an upset reader is an engaged reader, that like people like to say, like, that the Spider Office said at the time, and they were really angry about it. I couldn't agree more, because, like, if you're still able to get angry about something being done to a character, it means you care. It means you're paying attention, at least hopefully you're reading it. And it's not like a case like some of these people online that get angry because they read it on comicbook.com or whatever as a headline, no shade to those websites, but, or maybe some shade to them, for their clickbait. But, I know we both have written for those sites. So, what I mean to say is, like, if they killed Spider-Man off, like, a year from now, like, would that same level of anger be there? Like, has that card been worn thin? The fact that people are upset about, like, what's going on with Mary Jane right now, I think they're objectively, like, kind of wrong to invest that level of upset in something that's still playing out. Like, let the story conclude, then be upset. Like, we don't know what's happening, but like, that people are that upset means they still care, and I think that that's a good thing. Like, if nobody cared, it means that the character is dead, officially dead. Like, you have to kind of be willing to upset some people, and in order for just to test if the pulse is still there, and like you got upset back in the day about it, and that's good. It means you care about the character in some way, maybe not the way they intend, but, like, I think it's ultimately a good thing. Does it mean that they should kill people off every other week? No, I think it has diminishing returns, and I think it was still amazing that in the year 2013 or 2012, they were able to kill off Spider-Man, and people got upset about that. Like, I thought we were so far past that, and even now, like, the people are upset about Mary Jane. It's like, people are still willing to get upset about this. I can't. It kind of blows me away, frankly. Like, don't we know how comics work? Like, when the Captain America was turned out to be a Nazi, people got really upset about that, and it's like, really? Like, don't you read comics and know that this is going to be undone in a couple issues or whatever? Like, but that the medium can still shock and upset people, I think, is a good thing, and like, I dare say, I don't think this was a gimmick. Like, I think people really entered into doing this with the best of intentions to tell a good story. as represented by the whole line at the time. Like, I can't think of a time where all of the B books were as good as they were during the Superior era. I think this was an excellent time for Spider-Man comics. And yeah, on the face of it, gimmick. Like, but how many of those 700 covers did we buy? You know? Like,
yeah.
And happily, it was cool, you know? And I don't regret it one bit buying all those covers. They are cool covers.
I will say good gimmick and no shame in that. That's all I'm going to say. Like good gimmick, no shame. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
yeah.
You know, they did it for the right reasons. And yeah, we're raging to this day. I mean, like, and also how much of the rage is driven by like the era and the time and place that we're in right now too, Dan. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, the idea of Twitter and being and forums, you know, and having that much access to creators who, frankly, let's be honest, Whacker and Slott were really looking to stir the pot, and didn't shy away from that. And you know, you can have your own feelings about that. I don't necessarily think that was a good move on their behalf, but you know,
Dan, like, I can relate. Like, I'm out there every day, like, marriage sucks. You know what I mean? I like, you know, if you can like stir the pot and goad people a certain way and kind of dig in and like on a hyper sensationalized version of what you actually believe. I mean, like, hey man, like, there's no problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. I actually kind of tip my hat to the heelishness of it personally.
Yeah. So where do we stand on gimmicks today? Like, are we in another era of gimmicks? Like, is this, a lot of people like to say it's the 90s. It's happening all over again in comics. And it's all about the speculator market and variants and new number ones and ways to just kind of like, you know, push the gimmicks in order to sell comics rather than investing in quality, long-running titles. Where do you stand on all this?
I actually disagree. I feel like we were probably more in that era, maybe even when we first started the show, than we are now. I feel like it's kind of been tempered now. I mean, yes, I do find it ridiculous when, like, I'm, you know, in the CLZ app and I'm like going to log a book and it's like, oh, here's a new issue 1. Oh, there's like 37 variant covers that I had, like, which one? But like, I feel like a lot of that now, that's like being driven, I feel, less so by Marvel and the creative teams than like the distributors, like by Diamond and the comic book stores, in terms of like, how do you get people to sign up? I think, I mean, what was like the last like major crossover storyline that I feel like really like took over the whole line of comics in a significant way? It's been a minute. I think, I don't know. I know I'm less tapped in than you are, Dan, but like, I mean, I know there was the Eternals story, you know, Judgment Day, but like, it didn't feel as significant of like as like Civil War or AVX or you know, Original Sin or anything like that. Like, I
mean, that might not be by pure volume of comics more than it is by the audience just being exhausted and not making a big deal out of these things. Like, there are many events like that per year, but you know, but they don't get the same marketing hype, I think, because people are fairly burned out on them.
Well, to me, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, though, Dan. It's like, are they not getting the marketing hype because people are exhausted, or is it just like they recognize the fact that these aren't the kind of seismic pop culture events anymore because the general interest isn't there? So like, there's no point in pushing it the way they did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like why push something if it's not going to take over the zeitgeist the way a Civil War did? Or we're still talking about Secret Invasion we're allegedly going to get a TV show at some point if Marvel
Yeah.
Disney Plus ever airs it. But you know what I mean? Like, but you know, we don't have anything like that now. You know, I don't know. I feel we're kind of hitting that lull. I mean, the speculator boom that we're getting with the collector's market is a whole other conversation that we can talk about. But like, I feel that's like driven by like boredom and COVID. That's been my analysis of it. I don't know. Am I being too blasé about it?
No, I think you're right. I think it's different. I think in like the 90s and early 2000s, it was like a way of kind of squeezing more money out of you,
Yeah.
you know, and getting you to invest. Now it feels like it's in survival mode. Like we're doing this because we need to survive, you know, and if it's taken over Spider-Man, it's only because that's the book everybody is still buying, as much as they maybe hate buying it. Like it's the tentpole of Marvel Comics, and it's the way to get people to read other titles. You know, like quality doesn't quite, you know, stand out as much anymore. Like you get something like Superior Foes that nobody bought and was like one of the best books ever. And even with Spider-Man, you know, in the title, it wasn't selling very well. Like I feel like a lot of this stuff is purely out of like survival instincts rather than, like let's really like gouge the market. I mean, It's the same thing. We need to squeeze people, but they're squeezing an increasingly fewer number of people, and those tend to be people that I think like maybe want this stuff. I don't know. I do think there's a lot of gimmicks now. I just don't think they like hold the same market cap. Like the next topic I wanted to discuss is like, do gimmicks create fondness out of the pure gimmick and memorability of it? And I think they do, yes, but I think that well has run very dry. You know, Civil War was a big deal because it hadn't been done something like that, you know, in a while, and it really felt special. You know, same with Secret Wars, and you know, same with something like the Clone Saga or whatever. Like these felt like, and Maximum Carnage, these felt like big moments. And as much as I might not like the story of Maximum Carnage, it was responsible for me falling in love with comics. You know, today I don't feel like the gimmicks operate in the same way, just because I think they've burned out that well. Like every time a new Spider-Man costume comes, it's not lighting the world on fire because they've run that into the ground a bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I think that when I think of gimmicks, there's a nostalgia to it, and frankly, like there's something kind of fun and exciting when even like today they reach back and kind of pay homage to the old gimmicks.
Yeah.
Like certainly like this is not even like a today thing anymore, which is kind of sad because it just kind of demonstrates how old we are. But like I'm thinking of like those ending of the Ultimate Spider-Man runs where they were like polybagging the comics, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like the polybag, you know what I mean? Like it was like, oh, I was excited by that. It was like, woo, like do I open this one? Do I, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of fun and silly and nostalgic. I mean, I you know, like I'm one of those people that, you know, like I am the reason why like Nintendo continues to release like old games on vintage services that you pay extra for, because I'm like, I'm going to play like NES Zelda for the 9 millionth time on a different system. You know, like I'm the same way with the comics in that regard. But like I as we kind of discussed at various points over this conversation, like I also do recognize like the damage that is caused by some of this, and I do think it's real. Like I don't want to diminish that. Like I think creating lack of access points for readers is damaging. I think creating exhaustion and burnout for folks is damaging. I think, you know, creating like a boy who cries wolf scenario where, you know, like, no, this is I was joking about it earlier in the conversation. This is going to traumatize you, you know, like to me, like, you know, the current editorial marketing for Spider-Man is to just the boy who cries wolf. So like when something truly significant happens, you almost like you're not prepared for it, and you're like, wait, is this real? You know, like, did this really happen? You know, like,
I think about like Spectacular Spider-Man #6, where they were like, you got to buy this comic. Something really significant's going to happen in this comic. And I bought it, you know, but who would have known that random issue would have been the one that Peter revealed his identity to J. Jonah Jameson in? Because, like, who would have believed editorial when they told us that like that was going to be a significant issue? So who knows? I mean, maybe rewards to us who pick up everything anyway, just because we enjoy it rather than we're chasing a speculator market. Yeah, I mean, like, to talk about the nostalgia of this and maybe the like the lack of quality not really being like a factor is, for this very episode, we changed the logo to our show to be a chrome hollow foil cover to celebrate 10 years of the show. And like, it's a way less attractive image than our previous one. I mean, no shade to Josh who designed it for us. But like, we're doing it kind of as a joke, and the response to it has been overwhelming. Like, people are like, this needs to be the new cover. Like, we love the chrome of it all. And I'm like, it was meant as a joke, guys, but you know, there it is. So enjoy it while it lasts.
I love it.
Like limited quantity there. The hollow foil cover, but yeah, I mean, there is something special about the gimmicks, and they do create nostalgia. And I hope people like think about this episode and have a nostalgia for the gimmick of this very episode. So let's move away from that, Mark. And you know, this is a really hard pivot, but 10 years, man. Like, it is inherently a random, like, demarcation of time, right? Like, okay, we've reached 10 years. Has anything changed from this week to the last? No. We've just been doing this for 10 years now, Mark, whether it be Superior Spider Talk or Amazing Spider Talk. You know, it's been 10 years. That's a long time, I think. And very few podcasts ever reach that level of time, you know, not to mention like human relationships, marriages, you know, things like that. So like, I want to do some kind of reflection in all seriousness about us reaching this milestone. What does it mean to you, Mark, that we've reached this far into our journey together?
I mean, like you said, it's very significant for me. I mean, this has been a quarter of my life, Dan. You know, like just that perspective alone is very significant. But like you said, like, you know, this is not, you know, people joke, you joke, Dan, that I have a very high opinion of myself and my abilities or whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, like, there are a lot. The world is filled with people who are like, let's do a podcast.
Yeah,
and maybe there was a moment where we were like, let's do a podcast. Sure, what the hey, you know what I mean? But like, I feel like, you know, it's a testament to both our love for the comics and the character, and our desire to connect and engage with our fans. And, you know, not to get schmaltzy, but it's a testament to our ability and our friendship, Dan. It's as simple as that. Like, you know, we started as two total strangers out there, and you know, like, we became very quickly fast friends over it, and like this is, you know, one of the most important relationships that I have in my life right now. So, yeah. You know, like, sorry, you're stuck with me, Dan. I mean, you know, like, you know, hey, look, I'm I root for some really bad loser sports teams, so like you can't really question my commitment. I don't give up easily. But with that said, like, you know, at this point, like, you know, to go back to my earlier analogy, the only thing that's going to stop me from doing the show is becoming with the cockroaches. You know what I mean? So there you go. You're stuck with me, Dan. So, I mean, what does it mean to you?
I mean, I feel very much the same. You know, I was reflecting. It's funny because, you know, only a few years into us doing this, I got married. And, you know, I had, you know, I have a lot of like really lifelong friends that have stuck with me for 20, 30 years of my life. And yet, like, you, Mark, were the one I included in my wedding ceremony. And I don't know, like something about, so like, I guess it was only a few years into this experiment of the show, but there was something that I knew, like, this is a relationship that is going to stand the test of time in a meaningful way. Like, you know, I talk to you more than I talk to most of my family members, you know, and in more meaningful context. Like, what people don't get to hear is that before Mark and I record most episodes, much to my wife's chagrin, is we will talk to each other about our lives for half an hour and you know, console each other on various things. And we've seen each other through so many life changes, you know. I always tell my wife, we're just doing a review. It's going to take 45 minutes. Inevitably, that's not the case. And it can't be, because like this show is more than just the show. It is our friendship and checking in with someone every week or so, and the amount of meaning that carries in our lives. So, you know, something about this relationship must have like landed on me early on enough to elevate you know, into my wedding, or I was just some fool. But like, I'm curious for you, like when it kind of hit that like Spider Talk was going to be like just something like that was like a part of your life moving on. Cause like there have been times definitely where you and I have like been like, man, the technology is just a real struggle. Is this worth it? Like, right. You know, not that we ever like got to the point of nearly quitting the show, but like, I think even just in the past few years, like, and maybe it was the pandemic, it's really become a construct of like our lives. So I guess I'm curious to hear that from you.
I was going to say, was it me being at your wedding where I was like, oh wow, I guess I'm in it for real.
That's it. You know, like put a ring on it. Yeah.
I mean, like, and not to like overly personalize it, but I feel like when I did the book, that was very significant because like so much of that, like, yeah, like my name was on the book, but like that was our book, Dad. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that was born from the work that we had put into it and had kind of built from that. And, you know, like I think that was a part of it, but yeah, I mean, the pandemic was very significant too, because like it was like, and like I'm not trying to make it sound like it was a crutch in a way, but like, you know, when the pandemic hit, like, you know, the fact that this was one of the few relationships like was almost like encouraged. You know what I mean? It was like we can do this, and like there's nothing wrong with this, and like we can you know.
This is now the healthiest thing that we're doing.
Yeah, right. I mean, you know, like what was the first thing we did? Like, oh, maybe we get Tom Brevoort on, and he's like, I got nothing to do, sure. And then and then you treated him like it was CNN, and he got mad, but that's okay. I mean, he came back, so we're good. So yeah, I mean, is there a moment where it all clicked? No, not necessarily, but I feel like, you know, between being at your wedding, between the book, between COVID, between just, you know, like I'm not gonna lie, there, like, yes, the technology, but like, you know, as I'm sure you can relate to now, like our personal lives have changed in significant ways, and there have been moments where I've been like, can I keep doing this? Can I keep doing, you know, like, do I have the energy for this? Do I still have the passion for it? And the fact of the matter is that answer has always been yes, less because of my affinity for Spider-Man, but more because of, God, it's got to be the beer right now. It's my affinity for you, Dad.
Oh, God, you're
terrible.
too sweet.
Oh, God. Okay, just say something and get me off screen right now.
I mean, no, that's a very real thing. Having Alan come on the show to take my spot, over those few months, like the reality of the difficulty of scheduling this. And that honestly, is why podcasts don't last, is the people on it, and how they interact with each other, but also is there a desire to come back every week? And to answer that question as yes for 10 years, is a really hard thing to do. And it's funny for me because it's become less hard over the years. I think, well, one, our schedule changed. We used to record this on Thursday nights and I'd have it out that night, after the comic. And I think just health-wise, that could not continue. And also now that we've got Rick and Alex producing the video and audio edits has made it so much easier for me to do this. If I was still editing the show, that's a whole other conversation,
Right.
Just producing it and putting it all together in the behind the scenes. When the website used to crash every week and I had to call up tech support and beg them to restore it. I mean, I've learned so much through this process and it's grown, exponentially and made it easier on me to do the show. That's been huge. But through it all, valuing our relationship has been huge. I think, Mark, you're my closest friend outside of my wife, and that's huge. And I to a point of annoyance for you, there's nobody I want to talk to Spider-Man comics about more. So when those new issues come out, I'm in your text and you're like, Dan, I just don't want to talk. We have a show.
I haven't read it yet. I haven't read it yet.
But that's been huge for me. And, it's funny because it's changed. I think when I started this, it was, an opportunity to change the discussion around Spider-Man comics. I thought we really had something valuable to offer, and I think we still do, which is to say a really reasonable, and now with great history, accounting of these books and our feelings about it. There's a review that went up just shortly ago on the iTunes account, which is to say, if you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. It does help the show out. But they had this to say about us, and this really gets to kind of the heart of what I think makes this work. So this is from Thine Adult, whoever that is, who says about the show, entertaining and insightful, sincere and careful criticism from the hosts, not two guys on a mic looking to outdo each other or gin up false outrage. Straightforward and insightful discussion from two fans. If you enjoy Spider-Man, you'll love this show. And I think at the heart of it is that we're not looking to outdo each other or show each other up, even if we jokingly fight about annuals at the start of the show. That's all to say, we're not my desire over the years has changed from I kind of had a bit of an ego attachment to the show, which was how big can I grow this thing? How can I continue to expand it? And I still like doing that stuff just because I like bringing in new people to see the show and exploring the changes and growing this thing over the years. But I almost don't really care about my opinion on the comics anymore. I like talking to you about it. But I don't really care if people disagree with my opinion because it's not about ego for me. It's about having a genuine conversation with you week in and week out about the comic. And that has taken on way more value to me than I need to make my point about these comics and make sure it's definitive because I don't really care. I just want to talk about Spider-Man comics with you.
Yeah. I mean, I feel very similarly. I mean, the fact of the matter is when we started this whole thing, I mean, I was running Chasing Amazing at that point, and not that Chasing Amazing was this huge juggernaut of a pop culture thing, but it was like, you know, like I had built that from nothing, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like if I needed, if the desire to do this was strictly about giving me a soapbox, I had my soapbox. So like,
Yeah.
I did this show, and even within the first few episodes, I was like, I enjoy talking to this person about this, you know, like I like talk. It's not even just I like talking about Spider-Man, but it's like I like talking about it in this way, and I don't feel like like you said, like it's not about outdoing or pushing an agenda. It's just like, hey, like here's a standing dialogue that we can have because like it's just reliable and we're both coming at it for pure good reasons. And, you know, like I think frankly our listeners, you know, engage with that and love that about us, you know, like I love most of our listeners. I love all our listeners. I mean, but I love most of our listeners. As Dan can relate, I'm very curmudgeonly, but
I will relate that Mark can be curmudgeonly, but like it does not go more than 24 hours with Mark then messaging me going, I was being a bit of a jerk, wasn't I? Like he's very quick to recant, but
I'm very self-aware.
Yeah, and in our conversations, Mark, I will say like one of the things I've really loved about it is like how much like you have pushed me as a critic, you know, like whether it be your like weird jazz metaphors or, you know, whatever, like I have found my critical voice growing immeasurably by our conversations. Like and it's purely because we want to hear what the other person has to say, you know, like, and it's like, you know, you'll question like, why do you feel that way about this? And like, okay, well then better be better about articulating it, you know, through this process. And, you know, it's become easier, you know, over the years in terms of like our conversations have just gotten like lighter and looser, but I don't think our criticism has stepped back at all. I think it's gotten sharper and more acute because we know like what it is to push each other in that regard.
Absolutely. Although, as we'll get to in the next segment, there are some tropes of our own that have started since day one, which just fascinates me going back.
So how do you think the show has kind of changed you over the past 10 years? I mean, certainly both of us have been through like major life changes as documented on the show, whether that be like having kids, getting married, losing loved ones, you know, like physically moving across the country to a different home. Like, you know, 10 years is like a big part of anyone's life. And you and I are not very like our lives are like have a fair amount of momentum in them. So, you know, now you were never living with 7 Chinese teenagers, you know, but, and to your credit, but, like I am curious, like how you feel like the show itself has changed you over the years.
That's a great question. I wish I had like a very prepared response. I mean, yes, I definitely agree with what you were saying a few minutes ago about like how it's kind of like without. I read comics differently now. You know what I mean? Like, yes, I not that my opinions have changed in and of itself, but like, you know, obviously when I'm looking at, especially when I'm looking at the newest issue of Amazing Spider-Man, it's like, okay, what is the lens I'm looking at this in, and kind of like building on past conversations, and then, and frankly, you know, like, oh, I bet you Dan is thinking this about that. You know, I know how you feel about things now. You know, I very rarely, I mean, you know, like I can say that I think about Dan when I read comics, and I think about Dan when I watch Star Wars media, and how much Dan dislikes it.
No, Andor is a masterpiece. I'm gonna come out.
And I have not watched Andor, so there you go.
Yeah, so you need to watch Andor, Mark.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, I'd like to say, oh, it's I as a person am so different, but I don't know if that's the case. It's just like like you said, like I come prepared to be articulate, to be sharper, yes, we don't try to outdo each other, but like I find myself as time has gone on, with a few exceptions, to grandstand less. You know, like, you know, a good Mark rant is still a good Mark rant. Let's be honest. But yeah,
it's half the reason I show up.
I mean, yeah. How is Mark going to spout off this today? Like, is that a disappointing response? I don't know.
No. You know, I like beyond even like working with each other, like, which frankly I think is like, you know, it can be a challenge in a marriage, right? Like the unsung heroes, I think, of the show are largely our wives who like hold down the fort while we're doing this, you know, and have allowed us this regularity, you know, like it is time away from our families, you know,
right?
And that goes, I think, like, it's kind of a thankless, you know, position. So like it has made me a better negotiator in terms of like how I think use my time, you know, and what the value of that is, you know, like if I didn't find this show super valuable, it would not carve out the amount of time that it does. And it is increasingly carved out less. I used to spend like 40 hours a week on maintaining the show and the website and the editing and the behind the scenes stuff, because frankly I wasn't good at it. I mean, I've learned so much tech stuff, but like in terms of looking at comics differently, having all of the creators on the show over the years, you know, each one has provided a different lens to look at these comics through, which makes me like I don't know if it makes me more precious or less precious about the comics, but I can see things for what they are. It's made me less reactive, I think, to things. I mentioned the Tom Brennan interview a bunch of times on this episode, and I would encourage people, if they haven't listened to it, to listen to it, because I think it provides a perspective that a lot of comics readers aren't thinking about when they go into reading books or seeing how things are published or marketed, or, you know, and that's not to say it tempers my criticism, but like I think about so much more when I look at something. And frankly, if I didn't look at things differently the way I did 10 years ago, I would consider the show largely a failure. You know, like you're watching like the development, whether I'm learning about the history of something from you, because I still think that you are the master historian here, even if I get to be the nerdy nitpick guy, you know, like I'm learning about the comics industry from you, from people that have been on the show. And I'm learning about like approaches to art and marketing and merchandising and culture. Like I think I went to grad school during the show. And I've gotten way more in a year of this show of doing the show than I get out of a year in dedicated school. Like doing this has been an incredibly educational experience for me, from every vantage point, like how I upload things or who I bring in, what does it mean to be a collaborator? You know, that has been a huge change for me, and I think it has impacted every aspect of my life. It's made me a more curious person, and a more worldly person, and all through just viewing it through the lens of Spider-Man. But I think at the heart of it, I'm still a fan. And that's the thing that makes me most happy, is I can wear so many different hats, so to speak.
Yeah. Well said.
So
I don't know. Yeah.
So what do you think are some of the biggest changes, like, for our show over the 10 years? You know, like, you know, looking back, you know, yes, we're going to listen to some early clips from the show and see how things maybe haven't changed quite as much as we might think they have. But like, have there been some big like moments where you're like, this is the moment where the show really took on a different life, or this is a moment that has come to define who we are as a show, whether it's the first time we talked about Canadian bacon or otherwise,
or Karate Kid 3, or
Yeah.
no, I mean, this might seem obvious, Dan, but like to me, like the biggest game changer was when we went to the truly seasonal content format, because like I feel like, and it was such an obvious content decision to make, but frankly, prior to that, we didn't know how long this would.
Yeah.
Let's be real. We didn't know how long this experiment would last. I mean, maybe you thought it would go forever. I mean, like I didn't. I'm not. And that's not no knock at you.
You famously said when we started, if I'm doing this in 5 years, something has gone wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now it's twice that, and probably infinite times that. But like, I feel like, there's a part of me that's like, oh man, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen when we finally catch up? You know what I mean? Like when we, because it's like when we get to the launch of Superior in the seasonal format, then what? But like we'll
readjust our dentures and we'll figure out something new.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. But like, yeah, it's just like, but to me, like that gave us a certain focus and structure that the show was lacking to that point. Like, because really, we had the essentials, but other than that, it was like, well, we'll talk about the new issue, and then like here's a flashback to a comic that kind of ties into this, or you know what I mean? Like it was so sporadic. It was like a rivet gun.
But it was also kind of like a maximalist approach. Like we felt like we had to do the B books and the news, and like so I still miss some of those segments. Like they were fun to do, but I do think our focus in the relaunch of Amazing Spider Talk with the seasons was a huge deal in terms of going, we don't have to do it all. Like we can just do what we're good at and what we're most interested in doing.
Are you saying you miss Flash Thompson, Dan? Or
Never. I'll never miss Flash, but rest in peace, Flash Thompson, and Swarm and everybody else.
We need to get Meatball Baron Zemo on, all right?
Okay, well that's to come, Mark. Don't spoil the content. But,
sorry, okay. Edit it out, Rick. Edit it out. Okay.
For me, one of the biggest things in terms of our longevity of the show has been the Slack and the Patreon, specifically the Patreon. Like this show does not do huge numbers. Like, surprise, like this is not burning up the iTunes charts. Like this is a small show for a very niche audience. People are listening right now, and they're 2 hours into an episode. Like this is a very specific thing, But I will put this podcast up against any major podcast that has 20 times the listenership of us, 100 times the listenership of us, because I'm invested in quality of the show. But that can only last for so long before you realize, like, do people really care about this? Like, is the level of quality and time we're putting into this actually paying off? Not in terms of making money, but like, just showing that it has value to someone beyond just did they download it or did their Apple Podcast auto download it every week, because if it didn't, Mark and I could just call each other up and talk about Spider-Man without putting a show together, like maybe the show provides us the structure to do so, but like we kind of already do the other thing anyway, unprompted by doing the show. So the Patreon, like, one, I was bleeding money putting it into the show and keeping it alive because it's not cheap to keep a website and a show and all the other things that we do up, and it would allow us to grow. And so, like, the interest on Patreon has really kept the show alive. It has allowed me to not feel bad about the amount of money I'm putting into it. It's allowed us to hire Rick and Alex to do the video and audio editing, and amongst all the other collaborators that we've had on doing artwork and music for us and things like that, like allow us to make the show better without like me having to justify that amount of money and time being put into it. And, Mark and I don't really make any money doing the show. So if you want us to go to Patreon and sign up, we would love it. But it really all goes into sustaining what we're doing beyond Mark and I's like inherent passion. And so for that matter, like I think the introduction of the Patreon and the Slack and that community being so non-toxic really keeps me going, because it is a direct reflection of like what we put out into the world. Like my goal was always to start this show to prove that Spider-Man fandom didn't have to be only toxic. That wasn't it. And to go into our Slack and never really have to police it, because our model of being non-toxic has drawn non-toxic people to us, is hugely refreshing. It's proved to me that like what we set out to do is being achieved week after week in some tangible way. I don't know, Mark, how you respond to any of that.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, it's I know. I mean, I know I was joking earlier that I love most of our fans, but I mean, the people who are in our Slack, the people who support our Patreon. I mean, like these are, like you said, I feel like credit where it's due to us, that I feel like we've modeled good behavior, if you will, but like at the same time, we have created a community of, and it's not that we're all like-minded people necessarily. I mean, there's Canadian Jason who likes to notoriously disagree with us, but I hung out with him extensively at Terrificon this past year because you were too busy having a child. How dare you?
Sorry, Mark. I won't do it again. I mean, actually, I won't, but I won't.
Okay, there you go. But the fact of the matter is, it's like these are we were able to create a community here, and in addition to creating this is maybe where the ego comes in. I disagree in the fact that no, we're not burning up the charts, but I feel like for what we are and what we do, we are hella successful. You know what I mean? Like I talk about what we do with people who are not affiliated with Spider-Man or Spider Talk in any kind of way, with pride and with a certain amount of swagger, because it's like, because it goes back to what we said at the very beginning. I mean, like, how many people are go into something like this saying, I'm going to start a podcast? And
well, especially when we did, we are now officially ancient podcast, in podcasting terms.
So, from my vantage, we are a unmitigated success. We are, for what we do and what we cater to, we are near the top of the heap. Yes, we could always be better. I'm not going to lie. But I find us very successful. Maybe that complacency bothers you. I don't know.
No. I wasn't talking about quality. We just have to acknowledge it's inherently an incredibly niche thing to want to listen to a podcast about Spider-Man every week, But
I feel like for that niche, we satisfy it very well. Yeah. That's all I mean.
No, I don't discount that, and Spider Talk has found its way into my life in very bizarre ways. I recently found out that a coworker of mine's husband listens to the show, completely abstract from knowing who I am, I know you had a neighbor of yours that listened to the show and didn't even realize it was their downstairs neighbor who was doing it. You know, like there are a bunch of people of like higher celebrity status than us that listen to the show and reach out randomly, and we're like, wait a minute. Da-da-da is listening to the show, and I'm sorry if I'm embarrassing you if you're listening to this right now, you know. But like the thing is, like Mark is literally a guy doing this in his basement, and I'm a guy doing it in like a nicely newly renovated office. But you know, like we aren't really anybody. We've just decided to talk about it, and people have come along for the journey, whether it's 10 people or 5,000 people or 10,000 people. The numbers fluctuate a great deal. You know, whatever size that is, people have chosen to listen to us for a certain amount of time. Some people for 10 years. Like, that means a lot to me. So, like, I don't mean to, like, you know, discount who we are and what we're doing. Like I said, I would put this podcast up against any other podcast. You know, like the most navel-gazing podcast on earth. Great, that's us right now, at least.
Yes.
But anyway, it's been quite a journey, and it's opened so many weird doors, you know, like things I think about, like hanging out with Mark Guggenheim in the DC offices and having him like treat me to lunch. Really weird. Like, never thought I would be there, but like nicest guy. And you know, you never know, like, I mean, the core of this has always been like, be kind to people, and you never know, like, you never know, one, where they're coming from, and two, you never know where it's going to lead you next. And this has been like, you know, we talk about the Slumdog Millionaire experience. So much of this has been like, how far can you get just like talking about Spider-Man? And, you know, we've made it this far, which is to say also like a thank you to everybody who supports us in doing so. We've given shout outs to Rick Coste and Alex Galucki, who do a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, but like also to Alan Schurstel, who has been like, I consider him a third member of our team. You know, he would probably balk at that level of ascension or even just association with this product. But like, he has quickly become like a very close friend of ours, and is like, people, they're very positive responses to him being on the show. You know, our Patreon supporters who've been with us, whether you're brand new or, you know, like people like that have been with us from day one, who are donating as much as they can to be a part of our community. I mean, that's so huge, and we know who you are and value you with every episode. Ryland Bojack, who out of nowhere decided to send us a theme song, which has been like, you'd be like, so many requests for who wrote your theme song. Like, how do you have the best theme song in podcasts? Like, that theme song was a bop, and I hope that you guys loved his remake of it for this episode, which honestly, when it came into my mailbox, I like cried. It was so moving to me that like he would spend his time to record something so amazing, but also just like taking me back to, that was a blind submission. He just emailed it to us one day, and it's been a core part of the show ever since, and a real big part of our identity. Mark, what'd you think of the new theme song?
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, you know, like, but everything Ryland does is brilliant for us. So I mean,
absolutely,
you know,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in the Threats and Menaces song that he did, you know, a few years back, which we need to find a way to reprise. You know, also to Joshua Sutton, who you know, designed the new Chrome logo for this episode. You know, which is to say, he did that over the pencils of Ron Frenz and Sal Buscema's inks. You know, like, you know, just to give a further shout out to Ron, who we love, like, he didn't have to do that. He gave us a free logo just because of the interview that I did with him. You know, still one of my favorite interviews ever, back when the show started, and then asked me, you know, would you want Sal to ink this? And with no additional charge, sent it off to Sal, and it's one of my most prized possessions. It's hanging right behind me on the wall, you know, as I talk into this microphone, and it's been our logo in various forms over the years, and it's a real kind of identifying factor for our show. Just to say, like, there are so many people that have contributed to this journey over the years, whether you on the website or whatever, that I wish I could thank everybody, but yeah, I mean, it takes a village, right? And so anyway, and one last shout out to our wives and families who we are actively ignoring. Any final words reflecting on the past 10 years, Mark?
I mean, is there anything else left to say, Dan? I mean, except I want to hear the clips, man. I want to make fun of us. That's what I want to do.
Okay, let's make fun of us. So, okay, Mark came up with this great idea. We should listen back to the very first episode, Superior Spider Talk episode 1, where we covered Superior Spider-Man issues 7 and 8. You know, a great way to start the show on issues 7 and 8.
Random
right?
cardiac
Every comic
issues.
is someone's first.
Exactly.
What's that?
I said it's random cardiac issues. So, like.
There you go. And hey, look, my first issue of Amazing Spider-Man was a random cardiac issue. So, it works out. So we've prepped a couple of clips from this show that we're going to listen to and reflect on, I guess. So the first one here is the beginning of Superior Spider Talk episode 1, where Mark and I introduce ourselves for the very first time. And my whole idea behind this was, people don't know who we are, Mark. I mean, especially me, because I didn't have a Spider-Man anything at the time, right? Like, people knew you, and that's where most of our listeners came from. But, like, why listen to these two random guys talk? And this was our case for that. So let's roll the tape.
So I want to start off, Mark, by talking about, like, really who we are. We're starting this podcast off, so let's talk about, like, who we are as collectors and Spider-Man fans. So how did you get started, and what are you doing with your collection right now?
Dan, I purchased my first Amazing Spider-Man comic off the spinner rack when I was 7 years old. It was 1988. It was a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 296, which was actually at the beginning of a two-part Doc Ock arc, where Doc Ock was psychologically scarred by his battles with Spider-Man and was thus in a mental institute. It's not a great arc, but regardless, it was really the comic that kind of hooked me into Spider-Man, and I started buying the issues fairly regularly after that. ASM 300 came out a couple of months later, and that was a really huge issue for me growing up. And sometime around maybe when I was 14 or 15 years old, I made kind of a promise to myself that if I ever came across the means and I guess the issues themselves, I would try and get every single issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And when I blog about my collection on Chasing Amazing, a lot of times, I mean, I talk about the new issues, but I also like to talk about the issues from my past and how I acquired them and what these comics mean to me, just because this has been such a long-term arc. I'm 31 years old now, so I've been doing this 25 years now. So there's a lot of memories and a lot of weird connections. Not everything is always how you would maybe connect things together, but I kind of like exploring that when I talk about comics. I'm currently 5 issues away from having the whole run, which is pretty cool. And I'm savoring the next few months or years, or however long it's going to take. I mean, it's taken me 25 years. What's a few more months, right?
Right. That's the way I look at it, too. Like you, I've been collecting Spider-Man for a long time. I'm 11 issues away, so you got me beat there.
Yeah.
But I'm not too far behind. But again, no rush. Those 11 issues will be fun to collect. I did run into an Amazing Spider-Man #1 yesterday, and I was so tempted. But I'm kind of holding back a little bit because it was too expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been reading since I was 5. I can't really pinpoint exactly when I got into Spider-Man per se, but I do know my first issue was 375, the gold cover with Spider-Man versus Venom.
Yeah.
And like you, I have kind of a soft spot for those kind of things, and I always loved like looking over how Venom's like tendrils just wrapped around Spider-Man's head, or the kind of machinations of that character. And I poured over this book forever, and I learned to read really from Spider-Man comics. and that was like the real thing. And I really connected with the character being kind of a bit of a scrawny dude myself. You know, I was like, yeah, I get this guy. He's kind of, you know, a social outcast and stuff. Even though that's not really in 375 at all.
You know, I've joked about the same thing. I always talk about the relatability of the character, and 296. I mean, the joke of the issue was that Doc Ock was afraid of Spider-Man, that he, had beaten him to a pulp enough times. But it's still, I guess that just it conveyed no matter what. Even in those newer issues, I kind of moved away from that.
Yeah, I don't know if it was like really the character of Peter Parker that drew me in at first, more than just like kind of Bagley's art, and as a child, and it's kind of a violent issue to start with, but I think it's one of those things, like, as I looked into it more, I grew to really like appreciate who this character was, and I'm sure the reason that we both collected is really for Peter Parker as a person, correct?
Yeah, although now we're reading about Otto Octavius, so this is kind of funny. Now we start talking about it on internet, just to, but we love Peter Parker.
Yeah, of course. How could you not? Although there's some people, I'm sure, who find him a bit annoying.
They work for Marvel.
Whoa, don't go there.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. No, they love the character too. At least I like to think.
Okay, Mark. So listening back to that, like, there's a lot of things that really stand out. Mostly, I think that how awkward we kind of are. Like, we are not settled into our relationship yet. Obviously, like
Right.
I think we're feeling each other out. We're like not having quite as much fun. There's a sort of like I can hear it in my voice, and maybe you hear it in yours. Is like this kind of NPR-ness to it, like a
Right.
quiet like. Oh, I don't want to be offensive or jump on this guy's line, now we just like treat each other like crap. But no. But that kind of politeness and feeling it out, I think, is very evident in this clip. What stands out to you?
I mean, I appreciated how, like, in the very first episode, I hit the trigger of like, oh, don't be that fan, Mark, where you were like, no, don't say that. Marvel doesn't like Spider-Man. I mean, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm like, please, Mark, I'm trying to do something here.
Yeah, I want to be different, and I'm like, it's a gimmick. No, yeah, we're clearly trying to feel each other out here, but I mean, that's to be expected. We would get better. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the audio quality, I remember at the time thinking like, man, I'm really going to set us aside by having incredible audio quality. And I still, to this day, I'm like eternally on that quest. But like, and we've talked about this before, but people should know, like, the reason that Mark's audio is fairly echoey is he's on his back porch recording this at the time. Like, we have upgraded significantly.
I listened to that. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound nearly as bad as I thought it would have been. The way Dad always went on and on about it, but whatever. Okay.
Yeah, that was funny. I thought, like, also to kind of like reflect on our journeys. Like, we're both kind of like nearing the end of our quest in collecting all of the issues, and the kind of excitement that was around that then. I think it's become like less of a part. I mean, obviously it's less of a part of our show because we have complete collections, depending on how you define it. But that was already kind of like pre-annual fight.
Right.
For us. So
yeah, little did I know, my 5 issues versus your 11. I mean, your 11 probably included annuals, right, Dan?
It did.
I mean,
yeah, it did. Yeah. So what are you gonna do? The fight lives on. But and then also I was reminded of like the loud thwipping noise and how like distracting that was, is because like I used to embed links in the show back when like podcasts could do that, and like. Not only have we changed, the format of podcasting has changed in the like 10 years. Like, I often reflect on the word podcast, which is like kind of silly, and it's like, what is a pod? Like, iPods don't get made anymore,
No.
like it's not a product that exists, and like broadcast, like two outdated terms, like in the thing that we're doing. Okay. So that was the first clip. I want to go into the next clip, which is a about Dan Slott writing of the Avengers, because this was an issue where the Avengers showed up, and I thought there was some kind of interesting commentary going on here between us in this clip. So here we go.
I don't feel that Slott does the Avengers comfortably. It just feels out of his comfort zone. And every time he's kind of brought them in, first of all, I think he does it at the expense of Spidey's supporting cast. So, we get less Aunt May, less Mary Jane, less Carly Cooper, less whoever he's dealing with in that point in time. It kind of feels like in Superior 7 that the ending is kind of attached with a rivet gun because, we're dealing with Cardiac, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, the Avengers are here and we're about to take you, and this is not a choice, you're coming with us. And it just feels really rigid and forced, and we have to get our obligatory Captain America appearance in Superior Spider-Man, and it just didn't sit right with me.
So there was a time, Mark, where you wrote a piece about when was the first time that with great power there must also come great responsibility was attributed to Uncle Ben, right? And you did all this work to find where that phrase originated, and for the record, our first episode was the origin of you saying something was attached with a rivet gun. And I think we have to dive into this. Where did this phrase come from?
I probably mined it from some other piece of criticism, which was to mean something that felt like it was just attached very violently and inorganically and just, you know what I mean? That's how I mean it when I say it, this was attached with a rivet gun, like no style, grace, or flair, just there, done, it's that is the point I'm trying to make, because I just attached it just like that. So I'm impressed that I used it all the way back then. I know I use it a lot, because it's an analogy that has stuck with me.
Yes, clearly.
But didn't realize I did it in our first episode. So kudos to me.
I always imagined that you either got bit by a radioactive rivet gun, or you grew up in a house where there was a fascination with rivet guns, and you just eventually fashioned this identity. It's like the Kaiser Sose, there's just rivet guns there, and you're pulling from your environment. No, it was funny to hear that went all the way back to the first episode. The rivet gun, which you elegantly slip into conversations unlike a rivet gun.
I have to ask you, Dan, going back in time, what were you thinking at the time when I used that as my metaphor? Were you just what is this?
No, it's a very clear metaphor. I just didn't know how much of my critical journey would be focused on
rivet guns?
The reutilization of the rivet gun. Yeah. So there you go. The origin of the rivet gun. Okay. Mark has an origin story. Why don't we get to an origin story regarding me with this clip?
Yeah, what do you make of his sketching an octopus on the notepad? Do you think that's going to come to anything?
I didn't even think of that. What do you think of that? I totally missed that one.
Yeah, it was so casually dismissed by Black Widow. I'm not so sure. Why would she hold on to that? Oh, I'm just gonna hold on to this sketch that Spider-Man made for me. He's some great artist.
Right.
But I imagine it will do something. But they'll look at it and be like, oh, he's a really terrible spider artist.
It'll probably tie into, well, it could be two things. We've they've talked a lot with how Spider-Man and Doc Ock are kind of cut from the same cloth. Even in terms of the animals that they represent, the eight appendages, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe, they're trying to show, oh, look, it's an octopus or is it a spider? It's kind of, hard to tell the difference.
It's kind of a cool thematic choice there.
Yeah, either that or maybe they're going to pay it off with the whole Carly Cooper, private dick thing that they're doing right now.
So for the record, like this clip is from obviously the first episode where in the comic, like as like Dr. Octopus is like, you know, subsiding and like, you know, and letting Ghost Peter act. Ghost Peter controls his hand to have him draw an octopus that looks like a spider, and Black Widow sees it. And look, I think the origin here is very clear, Mark. Do you want to spell it out?
Are you saying in terms of you and your obsession in trying to find like the deeper meaning in things?
Yeah, absolutely. And then your reaction to it, which is one of
like,
I'm going to try to go with this, but I don't want to.
No, what do you want me to do? Make a prediction? No.
and for the record, nothing ever came.
Nope.
Of the spider octopus drawing, which like something should have come of that. Like that's a dangling thread there. But you know, it is what it is.
But now you wonder why I don't engage, because it's like, you know, when you pick up on stuff and I'm like, it's going to go nowhere. Why is he doing this?
There it is, all the way back in episode 1. Me giving way too much credit to all the little details put into these books. So the last clip is also kind of making fun of me, and it is me talking about solicits a little too much.
But how else are they going to get Miguel O'Hara in this story?
I have no idea.
And that just seems to be definitive that he will be in this story somehow.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting. You know, the last issue, issue 7, solicit. This is quote unquote what it says on the solicit for issue 7. It says, "And a new development for a Spider-Man who hasn't been seen for some time, and by time we mean centuries." And of course, nothing happened with that in issue 7.
Right.
So I asked Slot about this on Twitter. Like, you know, I asked Slot about the story that never appeared, and he retweeted my question, and he said back to it, things were changed between the time the solicit was written and the issue was finalized. Those developments will happen later. So is this that? I'm not entirely sure, because I don't know how you would... It sounds like he's referring to Miguel O'Hara by saying a new development for a Spider-Man. I mean, what other, you know, a Spider-Man sounds like a different kind of Spider-Man. But how do you fit Miguel O'Hara into issue 7, like, comfortably? It's already pretty stuffed. So maybe you're right, it is Miguel O'Hara. I have no idea what that means. I thought it was Captain Watanabe, because the character refers to, you know, Carly Cooper being the reason why this person had to take like a leave of absence, which is what happened with Captain Watanabe. And I think in the first panel, it looks like it could possibly be like an Asian woman from behind. But then the second panel looks like...
And I just trail off. And here's the real question I have for our audience is, you kept listening, why? This is like a level of detail that I'm embarrassed to say I talk about. But I mean, like at the time, we were really into this story, and you know, getting Dan Slott to respond to me on Twitter was novel at the time, and I'm still chasing that thrill in trying to get Dan Slott to come on the show unsuccessfully. I mean, kind of successfully. I did literally corner him at a signing and get him to talk to me on the show. But this was back in the heyday where I was trying to guess what was going on in the Spider office, and I think I'm still doing that today, and I hope in more interesting fashion. Mark, you are biting your tongue on this clip. Yikes, was this painful to listen back to?
I mean, just so much. I mean, we gave credit to the available Alan Schurstel earlier today, but like I would like to personally thank him for giving a voice to something that I had been like thinking of for basically 9 years, which was like, why does this guy just like look at solicits and want to analyze them in the context of what is he doing? I mean, like Alan just pointed it out in a random fill-in episode, and I was like, yes, You are my soulmate, Alan. No, he's not my soulmate. You're my soulmate, Dan. But he's my other soulmate. And like it was just like something from the very beginning where I'm like, oh, like, look, I look at solicits, I do, but I look at them as like they're guideposts, and that is all. But you're like, no, I have this is you know, like here's the dance plane, you know what I mean? Like let's just do
Cosmic brain, yeah.
And I just like it's just not that deep, man, because like things change and printing schedules change and. I wouldn't be basing anything off of this.
I will say, to my credit and to Dan Slott's response on Twitter, it was actually an interesting indicator of just how much scramble there was in the Spider office during that time. Like, the Superior era has really like gone on to be known as like one that was ever shifting, and they kind of didn't realize the hit that they were going to have on their hands, and goalposts were shifted, and you know there were a lot of changes made during that time that made it a fairly uneven read looking back on it. You know, as much as we were enjoying it in the time. So that's some of the fun things from hopefully fun things from episode 1. I wanted to share another clip, Mark. If that was the start of our journey, this clip highlights what may have been nearly the end of our journey. And this has only been released on Patreon, and I only realized a few months ago that I had never released this clip publicly, even though you and I have referred to it many times. And to set up this clip, Mark contacted me and said, Dan, we need to do an emergency podcast really quick, something we can put together. I have completed my collection of all the annuals, and I want to talk about it on the show as a way to finally shut you up. And this is what happened. Today, Mark and I are going to be, well, let's just say we're going to be engaging in some fisticuffs. We're going to put this battle to rest. With me as the victor, Mark, over the years we have argued, fought, snidely remarked on the differences between our collections. Mine being the complete collection at an earlier date with all of the annuals. And yes, you may have gotten all of the non-annual Amazing Spider-Mans before me, but let's be real. The annuals count, and I think your actions this week have only solidified my standing. What do you have to say to that? Well, first, give the listeners at home a little bit of an update, and then let's get into it.
All right, Dan. So I had a birthday in August, and for my birthday, my lovely wife, who has always been very supportive of my Spider-Man collection. I mean, she was the one who helped me cut a deal with the Comic Book Men reality show, which scored me my issue 1 of Amazing Spider-Man through her finagling. She purchased for me a copy of Amazing Spider-Man Annual Number 1, the first appearance of the Sinister Six, which, you know, is obviously an issue that, because I did not own. But
what was that, Mark?
I did not own it.
Well, congratulations, first of all.
And I will admit that it's a significant issue. It's a significant issue in the history of Spider-Man, and I've said that on this show in the past. I've said that. So, you know, if I was going to now be the proud owner of Amazing Spider-Man Annual Number 1, I might as well just have the complete run of the separate sidebar series, Amazing Spider-Man Annual. And I you know, went to an online retailer and, you know, for a decent price got their, because, you know, they're not highly collectible, so they're pretty easy to get your hands on for the most part, without breaking the bank in any significant way. I purchased those remaining issues, and yes, I now own every single annual. So I have my Amazing Spider-Man collection, which is my pride and joy. And then, you know, I have a little B-book sidebar collection of the annuals. So it's good that we've both collected the same 2 books, Dan.
For me, the hardest one to get was the 1995 annual. Mostly because it's not really called an annual, but it is considered
one of the annuals. That's the Amazing Spider-Man Super Special Planet of the Symbiotes that has that dual cover.
All right. I don't have that one, Dan, so I don't think that counts.
The celebration is too early.
Oh, that doesn't. Come on. That is like. You can't look up any catalog. That is not listed as an annual.
Okay, Spider Fan. We're gonna go there right now, Mark.
Oh, Spider! Come on.
Oh man, Mark, this is happening right now. Amazing Spider-Man Annual, Amazing Spider-Man Annual, 1995.
Oh, give me a break.
Planet of the Symbiotes and Scarlet Spider Super Special. Oh, we have celebrated too soon, Mark.
It doesn't say. It says number 1, 1995. That to me, that is as much as an annual as the what do you call it? The Ends of the Earth special. I always made fun of you for.
All right. Except that if you go by the annual counting number later on in the annual series, it is included in that number.
Is it actually concluded? Come on.
It is. It is in fact included.
Ugh, God.
Mark, I'm so disappointed. And look at this. I was able to catch you in the act of passing this off.
No, I don't count it. I'm sorry. That's ridiculous.
This is my new favorite thing. I'm going to tease you about this till the end of time.
Go to mycomicshop.com, look up Amazing Spider-Man Annual, and you will see all of the annuals.
I don't know, Mark. The official numbering includes it.
Well, they have all of them. They have them listed by series and everything like that, and they don't include it. So I don't know what to tell you.
Well, to each their own, I guess. The division remains.
I disagree. Now you got me angry.
Oh boy, Mark! It will never end between us.
If you want to keep giving to the show after this embarrassing display from my co-hosts, of course you can go to Patreon. $3.99 a month. You can get these great episodes of me being really pissed off.
Let's get back to your reflections on your annual quest. Is this a perfect summation of your annual quest? Just pure frustration at the arbitrariness of it all?
Yes. It's like, what actually counts?
Well, we will disagree on this eternally.
You bet.
I don't know where else to go with this, Mark, because I just threw a nail into this tire.
Well done. Maybe we'll wrap it up and let the listeners decide.
Yeah, on Patreon. How about this? In the comments on the Patreon page, let us know what you think. Did Mark complete his quest or didn't he? We know where we both lay, so really this is going to be the determinant. Is Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1995 an annual? That's how granular we're getting.
Let me repeat what that issue is actually called. It's called Planet of the Symbiotes, Part 1 of 5, The Amazing Spider-Man Super Special, Number 1, 1995. That's what it's called.
And I just want to reiterate, it's in the numbering of the annuals. When the annuals pick up again in the year 1999 with annual 35, with the actual numbers, that's the one that they count. I didn't make this up. This is a Marvel thing. And that's the end of the episode. Thanks again.
For listening.
Help us make this blood and bone decision that will forever tear Mark and I's relationship apart.
I'm looking at it right now. I can get it for $12.
It's a matter of principle at this point. Will he do it? Will he spend the $12 just to spite me? That's the question.
I need to couple it with a few other purchases, but yeah, now I'm going to just spite you and spend $12 on a stupid comic book from 1995.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Mark, I'll let you do the responding to this.
I mean, there have been few times in this world that my fury has been captured publicly. And that is one of them. Dan, you're lucky I'm still here after that. That's all I'm going to say.
And the funniest thing about that is it was not planned to play out like that. Like, I just randomly brought up that super special, which we still argue about to this day, whether or not it's an annual. Like, I will concede it's not technically an annual, but
Spider-Fan!
Yeah. Spider-Fan Canada is an annual, and I think it was definitely planned as the replacement.
Hey,
for
Spider-Fan also crapped on my book, Dan. So, you know what? You know, so screw Spider-Fan.
I'll concede that it was not an annual, although I do think it was designed as an annual and given a different title and fit the spot of the annual that year. But I will no longer hold it over you. But the hilarious thing is just that I said that off the cuff randomly, and then you completely broke down. Like, I'll admit, in that moment, I thought, "Oh my God, this is the end of the podcast." Like, your rage is captured in that audio, but feeling it on the other side, like that rage was 100% real.
It was real. I will say, lucky for you, a certain listener named Chris Dunn was listening, and within a few weeks, he sent me a copy of the super special annual or not annual. So that shut you up. And we were back to even again, until of course the negative one issue, but we won't get into that right now. So what
actually, that brings me to my next point, Mark, which is, a lot of people don't know, we mentioned earlier on the show that sometimes you and I will talk before the show starts and have these great conversations, and they're often not recorded. But in our earliest days, the way that worked was it would start recording the minute we hopped on. So I could actually have recordings of some of our earliest conversations together.
I don't know what's coming next, people.
Yeah, Mark has not heard these. So I brought two clips from some of our earliest conversations together that were not meant to see the air, that I thought were actually really fun and great indicators of who we are off mic with each other. I will say a completely separate event happened to me as I discovered these, is that I discovered, again, these have nothing to do with each other. I also discovered that there's this new technology where you can use AI to make people say whatever you want them to say. Again, nothing to do with the behind the scenes of this, but I really do think you guys should hear this to get an idea of what it's like to be off mic with Mark.
Dan, I think before we start recording the show, we should come up with a fake argument to amuse our listeners. Of course, the annuals count, but for the sake of argument, I will say that they don't. And over the years, I'll come up with all kinds of ways to suggest that my collection is complete without them. But I just want to admit to you here and now that I think some of the best amazing Spider-Man comics are annuals. Even the reprints somehow feel better as annuals.
Mark, of course you're right, but I hate to have you champion such a patently ridiculous argument, especially if it isn't how you feel. Look, if you think the annuals don't count, you can say so. I know it'd mean conceding that your collection wasn't complete before mine, but I'd hate to start this podcast off on the wrong foot. I'm willing to let bygones be bygones and find some middle ground on this, rather than publicly fight about something so silly for the next 10 years.
No, seriously, Dan. The annuals count. Any serious collector knows it. Stop being humble. We've only just met, and I want to make sure I'm clear, at least while we aren't being recorded, but the annuals count, and your collection was completed before mine. There's only one thing to do at a moment like this. Strut. You've earned it.
You guys heard it there. I mean, unassailable evidence that Mark...
That is fake news, Dan, and as corrupt. This is evil in the ranks of Amazing Spider Talk.
Well, I mean, unassailable, Mark. I mean, I think like with hindsight, we can both agree like your initial pitch there, like really humbly, was probably the way we should have gone. Putting me in my righteous place at the top of the heap here.
Oh God, God, Dan. What's your other clip, Dan? What else you got?
Oh yeah, sorry. There's one more. Again, like this came from a little bit later on. Actually just like fairly recently ago. I actually hit record early, and this one came out. Mark, what's wrong? You seem pretty upset today.
I am. I don't know if it is worth continuing to do this show if Marvel isn't going to pay us like they did during the Superior era. Heck, we aren't even getting free comics anymore.
Look, yeah, I know, but I want you to know that I wrote to Nick Lowe, and he said that the money and comics are on their way, but that we need to be patient.
I get it, Dan. But if Nick doesn't want our reviews to go back to how they were during the end of the Nick Spencer run, he needs to keep those sweet, sweet checks coming.
Look, Mark, the longer you keep the music metaphors going, the more pressure they're going to be under to quiet our criticism. They cannot deny the power of podcast criticism over the work that they do, and we cannot let up now.
First, the Spider offices. Next, all of Marvel. They won't be able to stop us. But first, the checks, Dan. The checks.
I mean, there's no denying your motivations, Mark. That was actually not the clip I meant to play. Like, it just slipped out, but... Now that it's out there, I think we've been really revealed here, in our truth. This is a money-making, gesture where our opinions, we're using them to fleece the Spider office so that they pay us so people don't realize the bad that they've been doing.
I mean, look, I got my Marvel shirt on here. You got me. Wow. Technology is something else. I don't like technology anymore, Dan. You're woo.
Look, our dirty laundry is out there now, Mark. I don't know what else to say. So, perhaps like this is the end of the show. Like we have been outed now that this is live. Like maybe we should just pack it up and say goodbye after 10 years.
Is that a cue to take it to the bridge, Dan?
I think it is. I think it is. So look. All jokes aside, thanks again to everyone who's listened to this whole show, all 3 hours of it, and supported us the whole way over the past 10 years. Whether you joined us with Superior Spider Talk or if this was the first episode of the show you ever listened to, know that the community that supports us means so much to Mark and I, and don't ever hesitate to reach out. Like, we are in our love for Spider-Man together.
Dan, you took us on a journey today. You died, you came back. I had available Alan as my guest, my not my guest host, my co-host for a while. You caught me talking about annuals and that sweet, sweet cash we get from Marvel, but alas, it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode, as well as the past 10 years of episodes of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Of course, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews that we do week to week, and episodes like this, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. Plus, a thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that we do. 10 years would not have happened without you.
To download our earliest episodes, including the very first time we got some sweet, sweet Marvel cash with interviews with the likes of legendary creators like J.M. DeMatteis, Tom DeFalco, Ron Frenz, Mark Bagley, and many, many more, because we are just lined with that sweet, sweet cash. Subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
This episode and many of our episodes were edited by Rick Coste. The video version of this show is available on YouTube and was edited by Alex Galucki. Our 10th anniversary artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Frenz, Sal Buscema, and Josh Sutton. Our theme songs were produced by Ryland Bojack, Tony Thaxton, and Spider-Maj. And again, huge shout out to Ryland Bojack for remastering and remaking the theme song for this episode and for the next 10 years of episodes. And our animated intro was created and performed by Josh Sutton. So Mark, until something has gone even more wrong for you, and we've been podcasting together for 15 years, what's our motto?
I mean, aren't you just going to sub in like some chat GPT version of my voice here, Dan?
Who says I'm not already doing that?
Oh my God! Who's to believe anything anymore? Well, let me try and do a clean take of this before you pervert it for the rest of the next 10 years. With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.